So we're gonna do something that I've been postponing for a long time just because it's been busy and a lot of other stuff has been happening. But it is time that we lean back and we reminisce a little bit of all the wonderful things that have happened in the year 2024 in the TCG, which of course is we're going to be watching the YCS 2024 Yu-Gi-Oh TCG recap. I opened this link up this morning to prepare for the stream and I immediately felt bad because the top comment was time to watch this so I can watch it later when Josh reacts to it and then watch it again when Jesse reacts to Josh. That was 2 months ago, dude. We've been postponing this for so long. I'm sorry. I just wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready to deal with I haven't 2024 snake eyes and stuff is not my favorite topic. I don't know. I have to I had to mentally prepare myself. But of course, I have played so much of basically this format this past weekend in Master Duel that it kind of brought up those memories again anyway. So I feel ready to rant about it again. So we're gonna be watching the YCS react. We're also I'm gonna be pinning the link real quick. Hold up to the video. So if you guys end up enjoying the video, feel free to drop a subscribe or a like or whatever to the YCS. Let us lean back and talk about why 2024 was so great or not.
2024 in Yu-Gi-Oh! What an odd year to say the least. Not only did we see a continuation of the 25th anniversary celebration with new rarity collections and new quarter century printings, but also a fundamental shift to the core of the meta with multiple big archetype releases. This year we saw 4 core sets, 2 import sets, 3 reprint sets.
That's it? What a rip!
Okay, put bluntly, this year is going to be a bit of a rough one to cover because compared to last year, nothing happened. No structure decks, no duelist packs, and just a surprisingly low number of sets in.
That was odd, I will say. But I also will say that for some of these products, I missed them, and for some of them, I didn't. I generally think that sometimes Yu-Gi-Oh! Has like too many set releases, so in some ways that felt good about 2024 is the fact that like some of those random like duelist packs let's be real, they weren't really that good anyways. Not for like they weren't that great to open, they weren't that great for shops and stores and sell and like all that. So the duelist packs, legendary duelist whatever, that have like one good card and whatever, like they weren't really missed. Structure decks, on the other hand, structure decks absolutely was a huge loss in 2024. Like the fact that we somehow didn't get a structure deck was kind of crazy.
General, as we're used to getting 2 to 3 deck build packs a year. This year generally just feels lighter in terms of new additions compared to the past, yet somehow more expensive. Without structure decks bringing affordable options to the table, all new strategies are isolated to specifically.
That's another great point. Structure decks always, despite them not being like, a lot of them didn't end up being like tier 1 decks, of course, but like it still was a good option, like think of even stuff like Red Dragon Archfiend or Dark World or whatever. Even if they never broke like top competitive play, they did give people an option to mess around with.
Packs, which in turn means that anything new to build is going to be more expensive, which leads us to a rather polarizing year in total. Regardless of which, we still have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. This is your 2024 Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG recap. Starting off the year, quite literally on January 1st, we'd see a new ban list take effect to try and address some of the decks from late last year. Newly banned were Yugioh, Kelbeck, Circular, and
Dude, no, whoa! Hey, I already forgot that was last year? I feel like ages ago, man.
Sold. Newly limited were Airlifter, Dryas, Sunvine Healer, Sharvara, Gozen, Rivalry, Teekboo, and
Rivalry, Gozen, and Teekboo have only been limited for a year?
Ebe, Harp Horror, Redox, and Snatch Steel all returning from the banned section. Newly semied were Pankratops, Terror.
Okay, I know what it is. I think I know what it is. I think I figured it out for myself. 2024 felt so long because of Snake Eye Yubel and Tenpai. You know how when you have a good time, time flies, and when you don't have a good time, it feels like it drags on forever? That must be it, right? That must be why I feel like those cards were limited, like, and banned. I would have said like 2 years ago if someone asked me, like, at least.
Top and Sleepy Memory, and newly unlimited were Infernity Archfiend, Kashtira Unicorn, Mind Control, Desires, Spellbook of Judgment, Sprite Starter, and Upstart Goblin. Honestly speaking, this is a fairly light balancing, clearly aimed at just toning down the outliers of the format, specifically removing the Ishizu mill pieces entirely.
I'm pretty sure that at the time, I haven't looked back, but I at the time, I'm pretty sure I thought this was a pretty fair list. And I still think, looking back at it now, that those are a lot of good decisions, except for Charvara. Charvara is still a criminal decision. But looking back at what the format was at the time, which this is like, this was after YCS Bologna, right? Wait, YCS Bologna, they still had Kelbeck and Agido? They still had Kelbeck and Agido for YCS Bologna. I did not remember that. Okay. Anyways, I think this is a fine list. And we did, but the thing is, what we didn't know at the time was how broken the format was going to get, right? Like, at least I don't remember knowing that when I looked at this list, because I thought at the time Charvara to 1 was probably a fine decision, thinking about how good Unchained was before that list. The same as for Airlifter. But then, in hindsight, with Snake Eyes coming out, like, I mean, Snake Eyes was already out, but not the broken stuff, like not Poplar. Looking what was about to happen, now in hindsight, a lot of these changes didn't need to happen.
Light hits to Race, Unchained, and Plants, limiting most of the major summon floodgates, and effectively removing Infernoble
the floodgates
from the
were
format
huge.
for
That
the
was a
sins
big
of another.
decision.
This is a historical moment here in Indianapolis.
This leads us into the first set of the year, bringing back an idea from the previous year to see if any more money can be drawn from the pockets of DM era nostalgia. Maze of Millennia. Release date, January 19th, 2024.
This bonfire set, right?
Set type, import, reprint, premiere. Major strategies, Flame Swordsman, Earthbound, Animation Chronicle imports. Impact.
It's the bonfire set.
Maze of Millennia is a sequel to Maze of Memories from last year, aimed at bringing in all the imports from the Animation Chronicle set in the OCG, as well as premiering a new archetype based on some pre-existing anime nostalgia, this time bringing Flame Swordsman, a full-blown archetype. Fighting Flame Swordsman searches a Flame Swordsman mentioning spell trap on summon and dumps a Flame Swordsman or mentioner from extra deck if sent to grave. Salamandra, the Flying Flame Dragon, equips itself from hand or grave to a warrior, boosts a Flame Swordsman or mentioner by 700 attack while equipped, and searches a Salamandra spell trap when sent to grave. Mirage Swordsman summons itself from hand or grave when a Fire Fusion is destroyed, pops itself in whatever it battles in the damage step, and if destroyed by anything but its own effect, floats into a level 7 or lower Flame Swordsman or mentioner from deck or extra. Ultimate Flame Swordsman is a fusion of Flame Swordsman and Fighting Flame Dragon that can pop a monster to burn the opponent for 500, can do it on a quick effect if it has an equipped card, and can double its attack in combat.
Actually, I have read these cards because I played a trap version of it that Peeps built at some point. He brought it to locals. I played it in Master Duel. It was kind of fun. It doesn't really play Flame Swordsman in the way that they meant Flame Swordsman to be played, because the whole gimmick, essentially TLDR, Flame Swordsman has 1 or 2 cards that can flip monsters face down. And so the whole idea is, like, you summon Supreme King Zark with the trap for it, and then you flip it face down to actually resolve its effect to destroy everything. Which was kind of like, you play like the Ruma Cannon and some Flame Swordsman trap cards that flip stuff face down. It's fine.
But pops itself at the end of the turn if you do. Fighting Flame Dragon
but
is
it
a
didn't
fusion
really
of a
feel like
dragon
playing
and a fire
Flame
warrior,
Swordsman.
can equip itself from board or grave to a warrior fusion, and boost a Flame Swordsman or mentioner by 700, and gives it a second attack each battle phase. Flamesword's Realm locks responding to a Fire Warrior normal summon, sends a card from hand to grave to cheat out a Flame Swordsman once per turn as a fusion summon, and on attack declaration can drop a warrior by 1,000 to boost all other monsters you control by 1,000 for the turn. Salamandra Fusion boosts a Fire Warrior by 700, stacks itself to protect its equip, and can send itself and a fusion monster it's on to grave to cheat out a Flame Swordsman or Mentioner from the extra as a fusion summon. Fighting Flamesword searches a Flame Swordsman Mentioner, can pop a card when a Fire Warrior attacks, or negates anything that targets a Flame Swordsman or Mentioner. Salamandra with Chain gives a fire it's equipped to 700 attack and flips an effect monster face down on activation. It can banish itself from grave to use a Fire Warrior or Dragon by shuffling back materials from hand, field, or grave, but destroys it in the end phase. Flamesword's Dance in response to a special summon cheats out a level.
So both of these can change a face-up monster to face-down defense position, which I don't exactly know why that's a theme with Flame Swordsman all of a sudden. Like booking stuff. But because they can both book your own monsters, you can book your own Zark.
Level 7 or lower Flame Swordsman or
destroy everything.
Extra deck and flips a monster face down. It can be banished from grave and tribute a face down monster to cheat out another without the level restriction from deck or extra. A lot to unpack here, but the long and short is that the deck really wants you to get to Ultimate Flame Swordsman equipped with Fighting Flame Dragon as fast as possible, which if done right gives you a quick effect popper and a double attacker that can double its attack on command and keep itself from going down by popping the dragon instead, which can...
It's surprisingly weak for how much work it is all I'll say. You know, like getting to 2 fusion monsters, one equipped to the other, and then what you get out of it is a quick effect pop is kind of crazy.
And then just quick effect put itself back on from grave. After the Gate Guardian pieces from last year were sort of a jumbled mess, this time the TCG Premier actually feels coherent, which is all...
I will say this, they have been progressively getting, I feel like, slightly better with these Maze World Premier archetypes, right? Like, Gate Guardian, from my perspective, Gate Guardian was utterly unplayable. This one was definitely better than Gate Guardian. Whether you like it more or not is subjective, but playability-wise, this had better cards than Gate Guardian. And now the Odeon, a year later, that just came out, Odeon is like, that's fine. It's a playable deck, you know. Like it's not the best deck, I don't think, but it's you can play it. You know, it's been topping some regionals. It's even won a regional last weekend. So, you know, they've been improving on these Maze side sets, which I think is massive. Because honestly, these Maze sets from previous years, I feel like they have been a little underwhelming overall in terms of their reception by the community, because like they just had like 1 or 2 standout cards and the rest was kind of meh, you know. Like this set that we're looking at right now, if you didn't pull a collector's rare or you didn't get Bonfire, your box was kind of doomed, right? Like even if they sometimes throw in a nice reprint like they did with Moltrami Purulia now, sometimes it feels like you don't pull the 1 chase card in the set and it's kind of meh, right? This time around, the chase card is 7th Tachyon, but they have improved the set structure, and they have also, like, the Odeon stuff is better than people expected. So I think that's better, but that's not what this is about.
A little more disappointing that it wouldn't do anything in the meta, though arguably wasn't the deck's fault this time. Being an archetype centered around Fire Warriors, the clear synergy here would be to mix it with the Infernoble Knights, who had actually been decently relevant in the last few months. Unfortunately, Isolde had just been banned prior to this release, meaning that accessing specific warriors out of the deck on command wasn't really as simple as before, and as such, Flame Swordsman...
Did bro just say, unfortunately, Isolde was banned?
While a competent archetype here, was not going to be able to keep up with the rest of the meta. Earthbound Prisoner Groundkeeper summons a level 5 or lower Earthbound...
Oh, I loved those, man. I really loved those. That deck was genuinely fun. The Runic Earthbound, it wasn't really an Earthbound deck. You know, we only played them as a tuner engine, to be fair.
Or Grave on Summon, locking you to fusions and synchros, and blocks Earthbounds from destruction while a field spell is up. Prisoner Stonesweeper can summon itself if there's a field spell up, and can be discarded to search a level 3 or lower Fiend Tuner, locking to fusions and synchros if you do. Prisoner Linewalker searches...
I wish they had slightly better fusions and synchros for them, because the main deck engine, like the tuner engine, is very powerful here.
An Earthbound Prisoner or Harmonic Synchro Fusion on summon, can banish itself from grave if you have a level 6 or higher Earthbound.
It was just not worth it to go into their own extra
then letting
stuff.
the opponent summon a new monster of the same name. Earthbound Prison is a field spell that negates a monster's effects on activation for as long as it's on the field, gives you an extra Earthbound normal summon each turn, and if destroyed by the opponent while you have an Earthbound, halves their life and negates all their face-up cards for the turn. Harmonic Synchro Fusion sends a tuner and a non-tuner from field to grave, then performs both a fusion and synchro summon that can be done with those monsters, locking you to fusions and synchros when you do. Servant Yugioh Gremlin is a dark locked synchro, can on quick effect either pop a monster or gain life equal to its attack, and can quick effect fuse an Earthbound fusion by banishing materials from hand, field, or grave. Servant Yugioh Griffin is a dark locked synchro that can quick effect summon an Earthbound from grave, locking you to fusions and synchros when you do, and when destroyed by an opponent, pops a card and burns for 300 for each different Earthbound on field and in grave. Servant Yugioh Kraken is a fusion of 2 Earthbounds, searches a field spell on summon, nukes the opponent's monster when they special summon, and burns them for 800 when you do. Servant Yugioh Grasha takes an Earthbound fusion and an Earthbound synchro, changes a monster it battles to 0/0, nukes the opponent's board when they lose a monster, and floats into any Earthbound in deck or extra. Based on their appearance in the Arc 5 anime, Earthbound's severely outdated playstyle of drop a boss with a field spell has now been replaced by an interesting hybrid fusion synchro game plan. And while it wouldn't be meta, it would spark a bit of discussion around specifically Harmonic Synchro Fusion. While there wasn't a clear deck that could use it now, the fact that it wasn't bound exclusively to the Earthbound archetype meant that it could hold serious promise for a deck in the future, especially with the word fusion being in the name, meaning that it was reliably searchable by a number of cards. Kaido Terra locks the opponent from attacking if they have
These were not very good.
2 or more non-wind monsters, searches Polymerization once per turn, and if banished, summons itself and recurs back a Polymerization. Horned Saurus is a fusion of Kaido Terra and another dragon or dinosaur, can attack directly the turn it's summoned, puts a field spell from deck or grave on board when fused, and gives you an extra normal summon of a dinosaur once per turn. I don't know where this sudden fixation on fusion summons for dinosaurs came from, but Kaido and Horned would actually have a home as a tech choice for dino decks, specifically because Ground Xeno was already there, with its grave effect providing the fusion summon access and Horned then giving access to both Lost World and an additional normal. Not a super popular option, but still a nice one. Chloralus, the Chaos King of Dark World, is a fusion of Rainbow and 2 or more other fiends, nukes the opponent's board on fusion summon, has stats equal to the materials used times 1000, and can on quick effect discard a card to make a card you control untargetable for the turn.
Colorless! And I'm happy to report, it blows ass.
Sadly true. Chloralus was built up since GX as the big bad end boss of Dark World, but realistically is just the most win more card they could have gotten. In the time that you take to set this up, you could have hand looped your opponent multiple times, and really that's what Dark World wants.
Why are we talking? Why are we trying to give Dark World a boss monster to begin with? Dark World doesn't need a boss monster. Dark Worlds are FTK slop. They're not trying to end on anything. They're trying to end your opponent.
Board nuke and a proactive targeting protection that loses to every chainable piece of removal. Drastic Draw by banishing all of your monsters lets you draw 3, locking you to Cyberses for the whole turn. Extremely niche option for Cybers decks, but for now not even worth it to give up your board, though could be an option with an archetype released much later in the year. Transaction Rollback for half your life points copies the effect of a
right, that was there. Okay, it was not just Bonfire, it was also Rollback.
Normal trap in the opponent's grave, and can be banished from your grave to pay half your life to copy the effect of a normal trap in your grave.
It's Beatrice's fault.
Yeah,
it's
so Beatrice can dump this out of deck on your turn, followed by a target to copy on the opponent's turn to create an absolute hellscape of scenarios involving traps with heavy costs that were never meant to be cheated over suddenly being cheatable. The most common of which was Ghost Meets Girl, a masterful Mayakashi Shiranui saga, which locks both players from special summoning for the turn. That's right, for the cost of half of your life points, every deck with access to a rank 6 can now Nightmare lock the opponent. Thankfully, this wasn't popular.
Isn't Beatrice banned? This is a recap. This is in the past.
Popular for the time being, but let's just put a pin in that and we'll come back to it around July. Lastly, Bonfire can search any level 4 or lower Pyro and add it to hand on a hard once per turn. A Rhoda for one of the game's most criminally under-supported types seems sort of mid on the surface until you think on it and realize that over the last year, Pyro's gone through a bit of a renaissance of sorts, with Snake Eyes being a deck on the fringes of the meta, Centurion having a desirable target, and so many different decks on the fringes that could...
Alright, I'll say it again. I don't think that the Rhodas of the world are the problem. Because if you look at a deck, they mentioned it. if you look at Bonfire in Centurion, it is absolutely fine. Ain't no one ever have an issue with Bonfire when your opponent adds Centurion Trodea to their hand, okay? The issue begins when the Bonfire adds the Snake Eye Ass, which... yes, let's stick with that. The Snake Eye Ass. That adds the Snake Eye Poplar, that adds the OSS, and so on and so forth. That's when the problem begins.
Could actually use a Pyro Searcher, and that was going to get a lot more relevant just 2 weeks later. Phantom Nightmare. Release date February 9th, 2024. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Yubel, Goblin Vikers, Voiceless Voice. Impact 1 card to change the meta. Phantom Nightmare on the surface.
Okay, it's more than 1 card, right? It's Poplar and Promethean.
Surface seems like a fairly unassuming set in the grand scheme. A couple of new archetypes, updates for some legacy archetypes, and a couple of pieces to support recent releases, but those couple of pieces would completely change the meta at large. But as usual, we're starting with the bigger archetype releases. Spirit of Yubel has the standard Yubel protection, floats into a Yubel from hand, deck, or grave, can summon herself when the opponent attacks, and when specialed, sets a Yubel mentioning spell trap from deck. Geist Grinder Golem can reveal a Yubel monster to summon itself from hand to the opponent's board and the revealed Yubel to your board, gives you back 3k when you slam a Yubel into it, and can summon itself to the opponent's board from grave when you summon a Yubel. Samsara D Lotus, contribute itself to summon a Yubel from deck, contribute on the opponent's turn while you control a Yubel to change any monster's effect to destroy Yubel, and recurs or summons itself from grave in your end phase if you control specifically Yubel. Yubel, the Loving Defender Forever, takes a Yubel and any number of effect monsters on board, burns the opponent for 500 for each material used, has the standard Yubel protections, and after battle burns the opponent for their monster's attack and banishes it. Nightmare Pain pops a Dark in hand or on field to summon a Yubel or Mentioner, forces the opponent to attack Yubel.
These were fine. Phantom was the problem. That's the thing, right? That's the thing. The reason why we're looking back, quote unquote, negatively on these cards, or why I am looking back negatively on those cards, is because of what happened later with those. So like at this point, Yubel was actually a cool deck. Like I remember distinctly with this support, some people played Yubel at regionals already, and it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool to see people perform with those cards, you know. But then there came a point where Fiendsmith came out, Phantom of Yubel came out, Varudras already out at this point? I don't know. But like once all those pieces connected, the deck turned too broken, of course. Like, yeah. Nightmare Throne,
and reflects any damage involving.
I mean, but I would argue even Nightmare Throne is like, once again, Nightmare Throne is a consistency card / extender. It's a good card, but if what you do with it is fine, then no one would have ever been annoyed by Nightmare Throne if the combo was fair, you know?
Yubels back to the opponent. Mature Chronicle gets a counter anytime a Yubel monster or mentioner is summoned, can remove 1 from the board to summon a Yubel from grave, 2 to recur a banished card, 3 to banish a card from deck, 4 to pop a card, and 5 to search Super Poly. Eternal Favorite can either summon a Yubel from banishment or grave, locking responses to the summon, and can discard a card and send itself to grave to Super Poly using Yubel you control. Super Poly Wet Dream aside, this is a really solid reinterpretation of a GX classic monster line. While not the greatest on its own right now due to the concessions you'd have to make on your end board, standardly choosing between actual disruption with a Samsara Yubel setup or properly setting up the greatest Super Poly target ever, only getting both with an ideal opening, Yubel would be considered as an option to load into the Unchained Fiendbox Mega Conglomerate, as it were. Not much else beyond that for the time being. Goblin Biker Doug Charger can detach a material from an Exceed on either board to summon itself and searches a Goblin Biker spell trap on summon. Flatter's Floater summons a Goblin from grave on summon and can summon itself the same way from grave on the opponent's main phase. Boom Mock can summon itself the same way from hand or grave.
Just in case anyone doesn't know, but the Goblin Bikers are part of the Diabellstar lore, just like White Forest and Azamina, which understandably so people don't always know this because of how little love the Goblin Bikers have received compared with those other, like one out of those that I just mentioned is not the same, you know, in terms of card quality. One of them is not the same.
on either player's main phase on a quick effect. Mean Merciless on summon summons a Goblin Biker from hand and has the same summon effect from grave in your main phase only. Big Gabonga.
Have you ever Gabonga a girl?
Takes 2 level 3s, on Xyz summon searches a goblin, can suck up a monster on board as material when a material is detached off it, and can detach a goblin from deck to it in the end phase. Crazy Beast takes 2+ level 6s, can detach 2 on quick effect to suck up a spell trap as material, can detach to prevent monster destruction, and can revive itself and attach a goblin from grave to
Crazy Beast is actually pretty good.
itself if in grave once per duel. Grand Bash boosts goblins by 300 for each goblin you control, gives an extra goblin normal summon once per turn, and can target 2 goblins to either match their levels to one another or make both of their levels their combined total. Grand Entrance searches a goblin, then detaches a material from an Xyz to summon a goblin from
See, Diabellstar right there.
hand, and can be banished from grave to detach a material from an Xyz to recur a goblin. Grand Stampede Xyz summons using goblins or can imperm a monster by detaching material from an Xyz once per turn. Hilarity aside, goblins were a solid rank 3 archetype, but sadly didn't do anything that rank 3s didn't already do between the punks and the gold pride archetypes, and those aren't even meta at the moment, so sadly these wouldn't be either. Lo, the Prayers of Voiceless Voice can be used as a whole tribute for a light warrior or dragon ritual, places a Voiceless Voice continuous spell trap from deck face up on board when summoned, and can summon herself from grave when a light warrior or dragon ritual is summoned. Saphira, Dragon Queen of the Voiceless Voice, can discard her
All the assless ass jokes aside, and despite the fact that I personally don't feel like Voiceless Voice is a particularly interesting deck, I do still think, when I think of Voiceless Voice, I do think of a like successful archetype introduction into the game. You know, like I do think it being a little bit more like lower to the ground, easier to play type of deck that like isn't super complex. It was a good thing to exist. I do feel like this sort of thing would have been like a perfect sort of structure deck type deck, because I think the unfortunate part of it was because it was relatively like in like what is about to be like a Snake Eye dominated environment, like which is a very complex or like long-winded combo deck. A lot of people were drawn to Voiceless Voice because of its simplicity, but it still was not really affordable because Low was kind of like the chase card of Phantom Nightmare because it was Secret Rare. So this could have been this would have been a really successful structure deck, I think.
herself and dump a ritual spell from deck to search a light warrior or dragon
But
ritual.
yeah, at the time, you were spending. I mean, it was cheaper than Snake Eyes, but you were still spending a very sizable chunk on essentially at the time rogue deck.
And can banish herself from grave to ritual summon a light warrior or dragon ritual. Saravis, Dragon Sage of the Voiceless Voice, can summon himself by spinning back 2 spells from hand or grave, including a ritual spell.
It was also overhyped because I think it had a little bit of a better standing in the OCG than it did in the TCG because of its like not caring about Max E type deal, which wasn't a factor in the TCG. So I think it ended up falling off a little harder, turning the low into like a not very good investment at the start out as well.
Bounce itself to hand in response to an opponent's card or effect to cheat out a light warrior or dragon ritual from hand or deck, spinning it away in the end phase of the next turn. Skull Guardian, Protector of the Voiceless Voice, gains 2050 while low is on field or in grave, can search a Voiceless Voice or ritual warrior or dragon on ritual summon, and can once per turn omni negate while you control low. Prayers can ritual summon any light ritual. It can be banished from grave when the opponent removes your light ritual by card effect to summon Skull Guardian or the original Saravis or Saphira from deck. Barrier locks the opponent to only attack rituals while you control both low and a light ritual, gives your lights targeting protection, and can search a Voiceless Voice card or a Skull Guardian ritual monster once per turn.
I think I would have preferred if Barrier was not once per turn, but on activation. Personally, because I feel like the only criticism I have of Voiceless Voice sometimes is even though the deck does not make a unbreakable end board, it still puts you in a situation where you kind of have to clear everything. Otherwise, the deck will just win immediately on the next turn. Like it, even though its end board is quote unquote smaller, the fact that like because it has such good grind game, I do like decks with good grind game. But it's with Voiceless Voice, it doesn't feel like. I mean, you're not doing anything for that grind game, right? It's just because all of your cards just do the same thing over and over and over and over again. you kind of have to kill it immediately, otherwise it'll just kill you immediately because of how big Skull Guardian is too.
Radiance can either spin back a Light Warrior or Dragon Ritual, or Ritual spell from hand or grave to special summon a Voiceless Voice from deck, or can pop itself and an opponent's cards up to the number of Light Warrior or Dragon Rituals you control. Taking the old and forgotten one-off rituals of the past, Voiceless Voice aimed at retooling Saphira, Seraph.
That was one of my favorite things about this deck, is that they did not actually force you to play the old ones. The only one that you actually play is Seraph because it's actually a surprisingly good card that held up decently well. You don't actually have to play those. They gave them new versions, which I think was good.
And Skull Knight into a functioning archetype, and did a fairly solid job in that sense. Lo being able to set up Barrier from deck provides a search and the protection to keep her up after her revive triggers, and Skull Guardian's Omni Negate is quite potent, especially when Barrier's there to protect the Lo. Voiceless Voice would prove to be a potential slower control deck for the format, being a solid low to the ground strategy, especially in a format with one other specific
low to the
deck.
ground.
As for the one-offs, only 2 are really worth talking about, but they're quite a doozy to say the least. Snake Eyes Poplar summons itself when added to hand except by drawing, searches a Snake Eye spell trap on summon, and puts a fire monster from grave on board as a continuous spell when sent to grave. This card completely re-revolutionized Snake Eye as a meta strategy by giving them far more material to work with in their combos, and by providing access to the other half of their spell trap lines. Up until this point, the only spell in the archetype that was searchable was original Sinful Spoils, and that was thanks to Dia Bellstar, but now you had access to the field spell Divine Temple, which in turn gives you more extension by providing easy fodder for your lines, and also a way to push monsters out of the spell trap zones outside of Flamberge. As for the material to work with, by using OSS for Ash to search this, Poplar would instantly summon him.
So cute. I mean, Poplar is a cool card. I will say it, even though I hate what happened after it came out. The Poplar is not only a cool looking card, but also I find Poplar fun to play with. Poplar is fun to play with, even though it is completely broken. If like, I don't know, this might be a personal thing to me, but I find some cards I find fun to play with, and some cards I find not fun to play with. A card out of Snake Eye, for example, that I don't find particularly fun to play with is Flamberge. Flamberge is a card that, like, the fact that it's just a random brick in your deck that you summon out for free if you don't draw it is kind of annoying. Whereas, like, the Poplar mechanics are kind of fun. You know, like, even though you draw Poplar, it doesn't feel as good because you kind of could have added it and specialed it for free. It still does work as a normal summon and stuff like that. So, like, the concept behind Poplar is fun to me. Flamberge, when it's on the field, it's fun to play with. Like, the mechanic of, like, placing stuff in the spell trap zone and summoning it out on your opponent's turn was something that I thought was fun. But there's a lot of other things about Flamberge that I think is frustrating, like when it's in your hand and stuff.
Search Divine Temple, be Link offable for Link Karibo, then come back as a continuous spell to be fodder for Ash's effect while maintaining a monster on the board. This also meant that Flamberge could realistically be weaved into lines far more reliably thanks to its material revival now having an easier to reach target than Oak was, but that was also helped along with another card from this set. Promethean Princess, Bestower of Flames, is a Link 3 taking 2 or more effect monsters, locks your summons to fires while on board, can revive a fire once per turn,
and here's the crazy thing. All of this would have still been, it would have still been a meta deck, but it could have been so much more balanced if they just applied proper locks to these cards. Which just is another lesson of how important proper locks are in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It is just something that you always have to ask yourself as a card designer, does this card need more locks? Because there is no way that Promethean Princess should have not, like, some stuff should have happened with Promethean Princess. Either it should have gotten banished after it returns from the graveyard. So many cards have that. So many cards have, you can summon it back from the graveyard, but banish it when it leaves the field. Why is that not here? Why is it infinite? Why does it not need a fire monster if it's meant to be a fire support card? Why does it not lock you into fires afterwards? Why is it only while it's on the field? Why can you even negate that with other effects? Like, it's just so mind-blowing. The same is true for Flamberge. If they just said Flamberge you can only summon fires for the rest of the turn, maybe it was going to be fine. It was still going to be a powerful deck, but I don't know, man.
can pop a fire and an opponent's monster to revive herself on the opponent's turn when they special summon. Princess being able to revive a fire meant that you could link off Flamberge to get its material summon off, and then revive it to utilize both of its.
It just feels lazy. It feels lazy in the way that, like, they probably didn't want to risk those cards not being good enough. You know, they wanted to make sure that this Diabellstar lore archetype is meta, and so they just didn't slap any restrictions onto anything, which is just like, I don't know, man. Take some time to properly design the cards and balance them properly, and they can still be meta. You know, I believe it's not impossible to make meta viable cards that are balanced. It just feels like, we don't want to take any risks. We want to make sure those cards are powerful, so we just don't lock it at all. And as a result, it's just way too powerful.
Effects, being the monster to continue a spell conversion to use on a piece engraved, standardly IP in early builds, and then summon it back to the field with its other effect on the opponent's turn to make a reactive SP. Princess's Fire Lock only being active while she's on the field also made it fairly simple to play around, as you could always link her off for something like Salamangreat Raging Phoenix for accessing Zealantis, or just drop down to a Hita to continue comboing off while not placing a bomb into the grave for later. All of this was just scratching the surface of what was possible with these new cards, and that's not even mentioning Bonfire, which can now search Ash to search for Poplar, giving the deck an entirely new way to combo off that didn't even burn the OSS usage, meaning that you could search it with Poplar and save it for some more interesting lines. A Team YCS in San Jose would be the first showcase of the deck's power, and showcase it the tournament did, with Snake Eye variants taking—
Oh yeah, right. I remember this. This was, at the time, it was a huge debate whether Snake Eyes Pure or Snake Eye Fire King was the better deck, because in the OCG, Fire King Snake Eye was by far the more dominant deck. Like, they played so much more Fire King than Pure Snake Eye, which, at the time, I think that was even before they had Olcanix. But it just turned out that I think one of the major reasons why Fire King was good was, once again, because Maxi, like, Fire King has better lines under Maxi, better setups with less special summons, and in the TCG there was just no all gas, no brakes. Pure Snake Eye was just the shit.
A whopping 39 of the potential 48 top spots for the top 16 here, though this should be taken with a very heavy grain of salt as this was a team event, so the deck's results would be slightly inflated due to that factor. Team Kids Next Door would take the event, being all on Snake Eyes Pure, and also notably being the first team on the exact same 3 players to win a second Team YCS. The group's decks primarily focused on the newfound consistency of Snake Eye, thanks to Poplar by loading up on hand traps and insulation.
This deck is disgusting, man. I'm not even used to seeing those cards in those quantities next to each other anymore, dude. 3 Snake Eye Ash, 2 Poplar, 3 Bonfire, 3 Wanted. This deck's absolutely
beyond the core
insane.
Of the strategy.
Appaloosa, Formula, Baron Savage.
Synchron as an option to access via original symbol.
This is 1 year ago.
Spoils. With Jet, accessing Borreload Savage Dragon is a cakewalk thanks to it and Diabellstar getting the job done alone. But also quite notably, by tuning with a Snake Eye, you can make Formula Synchron for the draw, then continue on as normal, loading it into the back row with Flamberge to reset instead of IP. This option allowed you to convert said Flamberge into Barone on the opponent's turn, which in turn would also trigger Flamberge again to reflood the board, now under an Omni-Negate installation. This would be a far more proactive version of the IP SP line that had already been considered, although that option was very much still on the table too. Pure wouldn't be—
I'm pretty sure the full combo for this deck had IP Masquerena. I'm pretty sure the full combo of this deck had no problem making Baron Savage and IP Masquerena. I think it did both. I'm pretty sure it did both if it was uninterrupted.
The only version of the deck to make waves, as a Fire King variant would also be quite popular here. As previously discussed in our
so there's no Olcanix in this one, but it's like you just have extra layers from the Fire Kings.
Coverage, Diabellstar accessing original Sinful Spoils gives the deck access to the Fire King cards thanks to Ponix being a level 1 fire, which in turn means that now with Poplar in the mix, starting with Ash for Poplar also allows you to not only access the full Snake Eye line, but also the full Fire King line by converting the searched OSS into Ponix. While not leaving as much room for hand traps and non-engine as the pure variant, this version had a lot more firepower in terms of interactions thanks to the Fire King cards, which were quite adept at constantly providing meaningful interaction points on the opponent's turn. The only other deck with a decent showing here aside from those two was Voiceless Voice, whose main draw was not being named Snake Eyes. Being a slower control...
Genuinely, there's like, it's funny because it's true. At that time in Yu-Gi-Oh, like, there's competitively speaking no reason not to play Snake Eye. It's just like, even myself, the reason why I went to tournaments sometimes and didn't play Snake Eyes was literally because I didn't want to play Snake Eyes. Like that is how that felt, you know? Like I went to this is about the time I think where I go to a regional with freaking Paleozoics because I just didn't want to play Snake Eyes. Like and that was the thing. Voiceless Voice is a good deck, you know? It's just like...
deck allowed itself to play lower to the ground in the face of mounting massive advantage generation, which standardly did mean...
And of course, other reasons not to play Snake Eye included like the price tag of it as well. Like, it's not just I don't want to play Snake Eye. For a lot of people, it also was just like, I can't play Snake Eye because this is like, at the time... Diabellstar no reprint, secret rare from Age of Overlord, I think. So I think Diabellstars hit like 60 at some point. Wanted was more expensive than that. Wanted at some point was 100. Bonfire on release, I think 70. Poplar was an ultra. Promethean was an ultra that were at beginning they were slightly expensive, but then they gone down a little bit. But it's still it was a very expensive deck. It was a very expensive deck.
Face of mounting massive advantage generation, which standardly did mean that the deck had a difficult time keeping up, but under the right circumstances could be devastatingly difficult to out, specifically in circumstances involving sticking a Skull Guardian with a low. Another Team YCS would be held in Las Vegas just a week later, and we'd see similar results to San Jose, with Snake Eye variants taking 40 of the potential 48, which again is slanted due to the nature of a Team YCS. The Jawari brothers would take the event rocking 2 Fire King Snake Eyes and 1 pure Snake Eyes, seeing similar builds to those used in San Jose.
I think this is the
but far
goddamn
more notably
YCS.
on this team was Chris LeBlanc, which meant that his YCS win total ticked up to 6, marking him once again as the record holder for most YCS wins. YCS Sydney 2 weeks later would be the first non-team YCS of the year, and with the team format no longer slanting the results, we'd see that Snake Eye had taken a comfortable tier 1 position with a lot of other decks under it vying.
It is crazy looking back at this, how... And it's going to sound weird, but how little Snake Eye representation this is. 19 out of 32 with how powerful this deck is kind of crazy. And I think that is largely due to the nature of, like, it just turned the format into a hand trap format, right? Any deck could essentially beat Snake Eyes if you just threw enough hand traps at them, right? So, like, people whipped out the Vanquish Souls, the Pearlies, the whatever, the Voiceless, the Kashtira, just any deck that can play a bunch of Veiler, Imperm, whatever. That's what I did at German Nationals too. I didn't want to play Snake Eye. I just whipped out a deck that can use a bunch of hand traps to stop them from doing their thing. I played Melodious. And so it was just like, it was just about like stopping Snake Eye from doing their thing, which it didn't feel great having to play the hand trap mini game with him, but it was possible. Which if there's any positive about this format, I guess that's the one.
For tier 2 to 3 positions. Heat Soul Kashtira would be seen here, utilizing Dracosack as a way to convert their cash bodies into Heat Soul via Link Spiders and G-Golem Crystal Heart, giving the more control-oriented deck a way to draw that much deeper. Phantom Knight Adventure already had a reputation for being able to play effectively entirely out of the graveyard, so adding in the Horus engine here makes perfect sense, allowing the deck to set up massive draws to back up any discarded playmakers. Shark would see a top here, utilizing the newer water pieces to access Stealth Kraken quickly, which when paired with Gozen Match is just a board lock for
I'm pretty sure this player is now the Lisan Al Gaib of the shark community.
Most matchups, on top of having access to both
I don't know
the
if they'll have
Armored
another
Exceed line and Bahamut Shark for Toad. Branded isn't a new sight at this stage, and unfortunately is still nightmare locking players out of the game, specifically using Sanctifier now that Expulsion was banned. Though it wouldn't be as powerful as Snake Eyes, Salamangreat would also top here utilizing the ever-growing power of the Fire Link pool, specifically that of Promethean Princess, able to climb into Raging Phoenix in archetype far easier. Vanquished Soul would also see a top, taking advantage of the best anti-Snake Eyes option in the format, being Dimension Shifter and Summon Limit, which unfortunately would grow in popularity as the year goes on. Jason Huang would take the event on pure Snake Eyes, with the entire top 8 notably being on Snake Eyes Pure or Snake Eyes Fire Kings. YCS Medellin would be 3 weeks later, and Snake Eye, while clearly still the best deck in the format, had dropped to only 50% representation in the top cut. With still no deck though able to put up enough numbers to compete regularly outside of a tier 3 level showing from Voiceless Voice and Kashtira, many players were experimenting with the more meta fringe decks to see if they could break the format open. Infernoid would top here, not only being one of the decks to benefit from the inclusion of original Sinful Spoils thanks to Decatron being a level 1 fire, but also being able to quick effect banish the Snake Eye combo pieces.
This even pre the Infernoid support, right? There's no Infernoid Flood and Infernoid Evil in this.
And Crave,
That's
still
cool.
utilizing the core of Snake Eyes, playing the Infernoid side in a similar manner to how Fire King is used. Monadium would see a Kraken here, still aimed at balls to the wall synchro plays to end on multiple level 10 bosses between Barone, Dispater, and Shang Ying, with not much changing in the build overall.
Oh look, it's Baron and
Runic would see
Appaloosa.
a top, still sporting the stun package game plan, with this outing also sporting
Okay, don't say it's Runic with a stun package. What the hell?
time-tearing Morganite to give the deck the gas needed to keep up with the flood of options Snake Eye sports, and Synchro Zone being used effectively as Messenger of Peace without the maintenance cost. Christian Urena would take the event with pure Snake Eyes, as to be expected, with no real notable standouts in his build. YCS Guadalajara would be 2 weeks later, and once again, no real shakeups in the topping list.
I mean, to be honest, like Voiceless did kind of pull up in these first couple of weeks. Voiceless is always here, you know, like it's always there. It's not quite reaching Snake Eye numbers, but it's doing all right.
Outside of Voiceless Voice overtaking Fire King Snake Eyes in representation. Though this is more so due to the player base swapping more into the pure build, now deemed the better build for the time being. Christian Urena would take the event again on Snake Eyes, being 2 YCSs in a row, playing an almost identical list to the last time with a couple of minor adjustments. Even though it wasn't a tier 0 level performance, a solo tier 1 deck is still a massive issue when it comes to format diversity, and as such,
It's also not just, once again, I've said this before, it's not just about representation of a deck. It's also about how a deck plays and what it does to the game. A deck can be at 20% of top cut representation and still be toxic. Like it doesn't always have to do with just raw numbers.
a new ban list would go into effect directly following Guadalajara on April 15th, which would not take shots at Snake Eyes specifically, but rather the structure of meta decks for the past couple of years in general. Newly banned were Link Karibo, Barone de Fleur, Borreload Savage Dragon, and Summon Limit. Newly limited were Anti-Spell Fragrance and a series of banned cards all coming back to limited, being Arch Nemesis Protoss.
It was okay, the Protoss unhit was kind of unhinged, but like the Appaloosa Baron Savage approach was really good in hindsight, because I think in all fairness at that time they were in a very weird spot where Snake Eye had just come out, so I don't think they could hit Snake Eyes properly yet, but they did decide to go after some of the generic endboard stuff that they made. Arguably, they should have banned Appaloosa here already, I think. That would have been, at that point, it would have been a phenomenal decision to make this ban list, but Appaloosa was a little late to the party, but still this list was pretty
Idol, Colossus, Kieran, and Chicken Gang. Newly semi-limited were Armageddon Knight and Delicious Memory, both up from 1. Lastly, unlimited here were Destiny Hero Malicious, Harp Horror, Terror Top, and Engage. An absolute head-turner of a ban list, Barone and Borreload biting the bullet in
Apple had just been reprinted. Yeah, see, but that is, in my opinion, what you're doing right now is more of an explanation than an actual excuse. Because, like, yeah, that's probably why they didn't do it, but that still doesn't excuse it. Like, at that point, I'm just saying, like, yeah, okay, reprint it sooner so you can ban it sooner. Because that is still something that you can do better at. But yes, that probably explains why they didn't do it at that time. But they should have done it differently.
Real time caught everyone's attention. The duo of synchros have been staple pieces of various meta endboards for years at this point, and with these bans, Konami made it clear that they were taking aim at the generic negation bosses that had become staple, though many noted that they clearly missed one by not banning Appaloosa. Linkuriboh would be the only real Snake Eyes specifically directed hit, and though there were other options to slot into Snake Eyes like Anima, Linkuriboh was more than just a Link 1, regularly appearing in the end board as a way to block your pieces from simply getting walked over, being a great hit alongside the generic negate bans.
I mean, there were direct replacements for Linkuriboh, so I didn't feel like it was the most impactful ban, but I still think it was a fine decision. Like, I don't miss Linkuriboh. I think Linkuriboh was definitely the most broken Link 1, generic Link 1.
Concerns would also arise from the release of
Can it come back? I mean, yeah, it could come back after Snake Eyes domination has ended, but I still don't know if it doesn't need to be. I don't think it adds much gameplay, or it doesn't add much to the game. Like, you can just play Relinquished Anima if you really need a Link 1 for a level 1 monster, and it only enables like some more broken combos for some stuff, so I don't think we need it.
Colossus, two cards that have been considered boogeymen in their respective times, namely in locking out decks from being able to play period, with Colossus now having a
Funnily enough, I don't really have an issue with Colossus at this point in time. It might come back to annoy me at some point. Protoss was definitely unnecessary though. Shouldn't have done that.
Way to summon in Nemesis Corridor, though we'd have to see if they'd make any real impact overall. YCS Raleigh would be the next weekend, and unsurprisingly, Snake Eye remained the best deck in the format.
This is slowly but surely. This was a very disappointing time to me personally, because I genuinely thought like this might have more of an impact on Snake Eyes than it actually did, but boy was I wrong for that one, because it turns out people just replaced Appaloosa and Baron with other endboard pieces. Not Appaloosa, Baron and Savage with other endboards, and because Appaloosa existed, your combos were still Nibiru safe, so...
Neil, pivoting the synchro slots towards Dispater and Omega to replace Barone and Savage, now aiming to hand rip the opponent with the two by banishing Omega for his effect, then cycling it back to the board with Dispater. Clearly, the ban list hadn't done anything to dethrone Snake Eyes, but that was only part of the equation, as the next core set would release a week later, and if anything was going to be able to compete, it would have to be found within that set list.
Competing. Legacy of Destruction.
Legacy of Destruction. Release date, April 26th, 2024.
Impact,
set
nothing.
Type, core set. Major strategies, Shining Sarcophagus, Ragnarika, Tenpai. Impact, one new player in the meta. Legacy of Destruction is a bit of a weird set in retrospect, as going into it, there wasn't a whole lot of hype behind it. In the OCG, this hadn't done anything to change their Snake Eye infestation, so how could it realistically fend better here in the TCG? Shining Sarcophagus cannot be destroyed by monster effects, can search a card that mentions it once per turn, and can discard a spell when the
Tenpai got its first cards here, which I even forgot about. But didn't it need another wave before it was actually insane? Because this is before Genroku, right?
It revives a monster to put it back in the grave. I know it's a bit weird to start with the spells for us, but it's important for us to know this card when going over the remainder of the archetype, just because it's an anchor piece.
I guess it did already perform before Genroku, I'm pretty sure, now that I'm thinking about it. I'm pretty sure it was already a thing before Genroku. It was not as relevant as it was. It would get even better than this.
Gandora G, the Dragon of Destruction, gains 300 for each banished card, can summon itself if you control Shining Sarc, can pay half your life to nuke the board other than itself, banishing those cards, and then summon a level 7 or lower Shining Sarc Mentioner from the deck, increasing its level by the cards destroyed. Silent Swordsman 0 increases its level by 1 each standby phase, gains 500 attack for each additional level it has, and can negate an effect that targets a Shining Sarc or Mentioner, increasing its level by 1 when you do. Silent Magician 0.
You guys are mentioning the whole Trident Dragion incident, which is just another, it's just another reminder of sometimes I think we are making fun of their decisions and stuff like that, but I genuinely think that was also just not a great decision business-wise. The reprint timing for Trident Dragion, I feel like was just not very good. Like, I think from a marketing perspective, reprinting Trident Dragion right before or right after Legacy of Destruction would have been insanely good, right? Because that's when the deck came out. That's when people wanted to play it. That's when Trident Dragion would have boosted the popularity of... It would have boosted the popularity of Legacy of Destruction, because if Trident Dragion is affordable, more people want to play Tenpai, and it also would have boosted the popularity of whatever set Trident Dragion is reprinted in, because people want to play Tenpai, they need that thingy, right? So like releasing Tenpai with Trident Dragion spiking to like $100 or whatever it was, and then it comes out like months later was just weird.
Gains a level when the opponent draws for each card drawn, gains 500 for each additional level it has, and can negate a spell card or effect while you control Shining Sark to increase her level by 1. Gadget Trio searches the Shining Sark or mentioning spell trap on summon, and if destroyed, sets Stronghold the Hidden Fortress from deck. More Marshmallow can't be destroyed by battle while Shining Sark is active and is the only thing attackable, can summon itself from hand if you control Shining Sark on a quick effect, and if destroyed by card effect, summons another from literally anywhere except itself, then burns the opponent for 1,000. Turn Silence, boost the monster.
With Christian? Yeah, because what's the point? Like, it's really cool that they sometimes decide to make entire archetypes or the majority of an archetype very low rarity in a new pack, right? Especially for more roguish stuff. I think that's very nice that you can potentially pick up an entire deck from a new set, or like the entire core from a new set for relatively cheap. But then if they're not doing well with their reprints scheduling, then it kind of invalidates the entire point, because people still have to spend a lot of money for like that one old card or two old cards. And the weird thing is that money isn't even going towards Konami, right? That they're not making any money if you have to buy a Trident Dragion from 15 years ago for $100, right? That is not something that they earn anything from. They could have made money with it if they reprinted it. You know, if they were the ones publishing the now accessible version of Trident Dragion, that's when they would be making money off of it. But I think it just boils down to sometimes they just mismanage their reprint timing, and they also sometimes, maybe they didn't expect Tenpai to be that relevant when they were planning their reprints ahead of time or something like that. I don't know.
Level by 3, then negates a monster effect if Chained and Shining Sark is up. It can banish itself from grave.
Because Christian has now gotten the reprints, but it's like, what, 2 months late? Or when did Christian support come out? When was Christian? January? No, what set is Christian even? I forgot. Anyways, it's not 2025 reprint.
Battle phase when a Shining Sark mentioner battles. Ties that bind summons 2.
Start of February. Yeah, so like 1.5 months. They're not that far behind with Christian. Trident Dragion, I think, was further off.
2 different level 4 lower monsters that mention Shining Sark from deck if you control Shining Sark and a mentioner, but locks you from extra deck summons for the rest of the turn. Future Silence searches a Shining Sark mentioning monster, then if used in the battle phase while Shining Sark was up, makes both players draw.
I think it's a consequence of how far ahead they make sets and print sets. They're always months ahead, so when they notice something needs a reprint, it takes them ages to slot it somewhere. On the one hand, yes. On the other hand, it can't be that hard to predict a certain card will need a reprint when that card comes out, right? Like when you know months ahead Christian is getting support, is it that hard to look at the Christian cards that already exist and maybe look at, oh, this card is an ultra rare from 2011 and only has 1 print? Maybe that card would be smart to slot somewhere around the same time as that product. You know, like I don't know if it's that much to ask.
Until they have 6 cards in hand. Stronghold the Hidden Fortress summons itself as an effect monster that gains 1,000 for each Shining Sark or mentioning monster you control, and can destroy an opponent's attacking monster while you control Shining Sark once per turn. Honestly, a really interesting archetype, based entirely around Yugi's deck from his final duel against Atem at the end of the original anime, and its lines are really quite solid. Starting from Gadget Trio, you can search Sark, search Gandora with Sark, summon Gandora, and destroy the trio, which will get you both one of the other monsters out of the deck via Gandora, and Stronghold via the trio, resulting in a Battle Popper and standardly a spell negation with Silent Magician 0 coming down off Gandora, which will have 2,000 attack by the time the opponent's turn starts. While decent enough, the problem stood that the deck didn't really do enough for the current landscape, as it really seemed like the deck could put up exactly 1 piece of interaction per engine piece in the opener, and sadly that didn't do all that much with other decks in the meta could do so much more with much less. Refrain the Melodious Songstress in the scale can dump a Melodious from deck to boost a Melodious fusion by its level times 200, searches a Melodious monster on summon, and can scale herself from extra when a Melodious fusion is summoned. Couplet in scale locks your pendulum summons to lights, can search a Melodious spell trap if you only control Melodious monsters, if added to hand except by normal draw, can special level 4 lower Melodious from hand or grave, and shares the same rescaling effect as Refrain. Baka the Melodious Maestra takes any 2 Melodious monsters, blocks Melodious fusion effects from being negated, summons a Melodious from deck when summoned, and revives a Melodious other than herself when sent to grave. Flowering Etoile the Melodious Magnificat takes a Melodious Maestra and 2 other Melodious monsters, can quick effect banish any number of Melodious monsters to bounce that many opponent's cards, returning the Melodious monsters at the end phase, and if removed by the opponent, floats into any Melodious in deck or extra. Melodious Concerto fusion summons a fairy using
Flowering Etoile, probably hands down the most fun boss monster they've made in 2024. I can't think of one right now that I think is more fun to play with than Flowering Etoile, without slapping Omni Negates on it anywhere or whatever. Such a fun way to like save your entire board until the end phase, get some bounces off of it. It has an effect that floats if your opponent can deal with it. Such a fun card, dude.
Using monsters from hand, field, or pen zones, and if
While
Melodious
still
fusion
being
hits the grave
powerful.
while it's engraved, places itself on bottom of the deck to draw a card. Huh, breaking an old fusion from deck spell. I wonder why that seems familiar. Making new fusions for the older spells can pose balancing issues if the new fusion is too powerful or generic, specifically with targets like Neos Fusion and Ostinato. Oh right, that. Ostinato for many would immediately come to mind, being a fusion from deck spell that truly has no real downsides, allowing it to be used as an engine enabler for various strategies, but most notably for decks with a
It's so criminal they used it in Snake Eyes, man. I hate that timeline.
Pyro starter. By starting with either Refrain or Ostinato, one could weave a line through Baka without locking themselves, able to climb up to make Appaloosa thanks to cards like Exceed the Pendulum, then pin summon back out 2 level 4s to make Infernal Flame Banshee, which in turn gets you to a Pyro from deck, meaning that Snake Eyes now have a way to get their starters while also accessing an Appaloosa for insulation on their play lines. While this wasn't the only use for the Melodious cards, it was by far the most prominent, and as such,
Okay, come on. The deck, like, pure Melodious deserves to be mentioned. Come on, that deck, like, I'm pretty sure Herman won Nationals with that deck. People played that deck a lot. It topped regionals, nationals, and stuff like that. It's worth mentioning. Come on.
would be an incredibly useful engine for any deck that needed access to rank 4s and insulation, which are most decks. As for the archetype itself, Etoile was actually a pretty solid boss for the archetype, able to tag out your board to ruin your opponents just to have yours come back later, and floats into the incredibly annoying to deal with Bloom Diva to boot, as any Duel Links player can attest. The best part to the deck is that while first movement solo does lock you to Melodious monsters, the rest of the archetype doesn't outside of their link that can be used for in-archetype explosivity, which means that you can either divert yourself down any number of generic options, or opt for the in-archetype path to set up Aria and Elegy at the same time. All of this was incredible for Melodious, but wouldn't rise them above the Rogue camp for now, thanks in large part to the still prevalent Snake Eyes and another archetype we'll discuss soon.
I mean, I won't argue with the fact that it was still a tier 2/rogue-ish deck. Like, it definitely was that. But it was a pretty good one at that.
Though its usage as a generic engine would be noted.
This deck would have, it's just a lot of these decks, and that's going to be a very common theme throughout 2024, is the fact that we are, like, they're releasing good and solid decks into an environment that is just like a freaking wildfire for them, no pun intended. But like you're releasing anything into Snake Eye Tenpai Yubel format, of course the bar is incredibly high for it to be good, like to be meta relevant. Like these decks, a lot of these decks are actually quite good, like Voiceless Voice and now Melodious. It's just that they're competing with Snake Eye Tenpai and later on Yubel. Like, of course they're not remembered as like the most powerful introductions.
Rika Evil Seed can summon itself from hand by pitching an insect, plant, or reptile, for which I'll be referring to as the tri-type for this section, and on summon, searches 2 Ragnaraka cards from banishment or deck, then banishes a card from hand. Samurai Beetle summons itself from hand by cycling back a banished tri-type, and if sent to grave for a Ragnaraka link summon, revives a level 4 or lower.
See, when I read these cards for the first time, I thought they were cool. Turns out they were just plant link support.
Tri-type. Armored Lizard summons itself from hand by banishing a tri-type from grave and can discard a tri-type to bounce an opponent's non-tri-type monster. Skeletal Soldier is a Link 2 requiring 2 monsters with at least one of the tri-types,
Nash,
can revive a
17.
Ragnarika once per
You.
turn, and can bottom a tri-type you control to summon itself from grave. Mantis Monk is a Link 3 requiring at least one of the tri-type, can banish 2 tri-types from grave to search a Ragnarika trap,
They're
and
still
has
cool.
the same
The artworks on these are
Chain
pretty
Coils is
fire.
a Link 4 with the same summon requirement, can lock both players in-hand monster effects for the turn in response to an opponent's monster effect, and has the same self-revive effect. Stack Sovereign is a Link 5 requiring 2+ of the tri-type, pops 2 monsters when the opponent summons from the extra deck, and has the same self-revive effect. Bloom boosts the tri-type by 300 and drops all non-tri-types by 300, and can either search a Ragnarika monster, then discard a card, or special a Ragnarika from hand, grave, or banishment once per turn. Hunting Dance pops opponent's cards up to the number of different types in the tri-type that you control links for, and can be banished from grave when a tri-type is destroyed to pop a monster your opponent controls. While we always do love a new tri-type in this household, especially one with as much promise as plants, insects, and reptiles have, the issue stood that Ragnarika effectively just did more of what plants and insects already could do, providing near infinite board swarming. The main thing both sides needed was a good payoff for all of that swarming, as standardly you'd lock yourself at some point in there and need to stay in type to build a board, which this release did nothing to solve. For now, these would be disregarded, but as with all other plant and insect support, would have an eye kept on it in case a payoff ever did arise. Tenpai Dragon Pydra searches are set to Sangen spell trap on summon, blocks battle damage to you from your fire dragons, and can quick synchro in the battle phase.
Everyone knows what
Fadra
that
on
does.
summon, or when a monster battles in the damage step, revives a level 4 or lower fire dragon, blocks fire dragons from battle destruction.
I don't need to
and can
know.
quick
You don't need
synchro
to
in the
explain
battle
to me.
phase. Chundra can quick synchro in
Yeah,
the battle
I know
phase,
him
can summon itself
too.
from hand if you control a fire dragon, and summons a level 4 or lower fire dragon from deck when a monster battles.
Yeah.
Sagenpai Bident Dragon is
Definitely
a
does
dragon
that.
locked level 7 synchro that revives a fire dragon on synchro summon and can revive itself on quick effect if 3 or more attacks have been declared that turn, popping a card on field when you do. Sangenpai Transcendent Dragon is a dragon locked level 10 synchro, forces the opponent to attack if able, locks the opponent from using cards or effects in the battle phase, swaps the board to attack mode on synchro summon, and has the same self-revival effect as Bident. Song and Summoning makes your fire dragons unaffected by opponent's activated effects in the main phase 1,
Yeah.
can search a Tenpai Dragon, then discard a card once per turn, and if destroyed in the battle phase, doubles the attacks of a dragon synchro. Song and Kaiman can either search a level 4 fire dragon, summon a fire dragon from hand, or do both if you activated it in the battle phase. While unassuming on the surface due to the stigma surrounding the battle phase decks up until this
Unassuming. The thing is, from nowadays perspective, everyone knows how broken these guys are. But unassuming, it's actually correct. When we read, I remember this, when I read these cards for the first time, I did not think they were this good. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, almost word for word, I said, yeah, these are good effects, but I don't know if it gets you to play a going second battle phase deck. I don't think anyone, I mean, I certainly didn't think it was going to be that busted. I don't know. It's just because that concept has just never been this good. It was all like, oh yeah, they're unaffected. That's kind of annoying. Going second is not that good in Yu-Gi-Oh though. I don't know if that's going to be a thing. And then like, it was a thing. Holy.
point, Tenpai was actually far more potent than any battle-focused strategy we'd ever seen before, namely because of its consistency to block the opponent out of stopping its lines, then moving to the battle phase to end the game over 4 times in one turn. If Tenpai gets to the battle phase, they can output a maximum of 37,400 damage off of a single card, being either Pydra or Kaiman, meaning that in addition to the 15 main
37,000 is so funny, man. It would be so funny if it wasn't so freaking sad and toxic.
deck slots that you need for the deck, the remaining 25 can be dedicated towards hand trap and consistency tools to help ensure the beyond lethal hit, namely that of Pot of Prosperity, as you can still OTK through the half.
Nah, man, the fact that the fact that they played Pot of Prosperity as a blind second OTK deck was also criminal. That is a red flag if I've ever seen one. Holy shit, was that annoying.
Damage downside. This was partially thanks to the Edison format occasional Trident Dragion, who gave the new Tenpai bosses that big damage push needed, but therein lied the main issue with the deck out the gate. Because Trident Dragion was a required card and only
Play the
had an
clip.
original printing from 2009, the card was instantly bought out and the price skyrocketed, prompting Konami to suggest to the community that if you don't have a copy, you could just borrow one from a friend, which got memed into the ground instantly. Overall, this deck, thanks to its ability to play so much non-engine, would be a contender for the upcoming metagame, but just how much would have to be seen. Snake Idea Bellstar can move itself and an opponent's attacking monster to the spell trap zone and can...
This is another card that I underestimated because I didn't think it was going to see play when like the Snake Eye deck is already so powerful, but the additional lines it gave you off of the Divine Temple was just so broken, man. It was also, if you've we've seen some other deck lists beforehand. The reason why I thought it wasn't going to be played is because I thought it was going to be another brick in the deck. In the sense that like you don't want more bricks if your deck is already that powerful, but like functionally it wasn't actually a brick because it just replaced one Flamberge. So you didn't have to play more bricks to play Snake Idea Bellstar because it kind of just made it so that if you drew one Flamberge, it wasn't as bad if you have the Snake Idea Bellstar in your deck. Because normally the Flamberge was often, before this came out, the Flamberge was often the card that you placed for Temple from the deck, and then you didn't have another one in the deck, which is why people played two. But now you wanted to place this anyways.
Continuous spell,
So
place a fire monster from grave in the spell trap zone to move itself back to the monster zone. This would be a solid extension piece for the pure Snake Eye variant, giving you a way to convert Poplar and Flamberge's spell trap zone effects into even more swarming potential, though notably didn't really fit into the Fire King variant. Centurion Gargoyle 2 can send a face-up Centurion card to the grave to summon itself from hand. If sent to grave for a synchro material, adds itself back to hand, and can summon itself...
I hate how they treated Centurion, dude. There's like so much lackluster support. Like there's so many cool Centurion cards, but for every cool Centurion support card, there's one that's just so lackluster, and Gargoyle is one of them. And the problem is because the deck is so desperate for support, it actually ends up playing those cards. It actually ends up playing those mediocre cards because it just wants some way to extend. Like it's so desperate for it.
If treated as a continuous trap, then reduce its level by 4. Auxilla is a level 8 synchro that protects your face-up continuouses from being destroyed.
For every good support card, there's a mediocre one.
Searched in a Centurion on summon, and in the end phase can place a non-synchro Centurion from grave or banishment on board as a continuous trap. Wake Up Centurion can summon a level 4 or 8 token if you have a monster.
Like why does Wake Up have the condition that you need a monster card in your spell and trap zone? This card literally says, I'm an extender in scenarios where you don't need an extender. How about that?
Card in your spell trap zone, locking it to not be fusion or link material, and can be banished from grave to dump a Centurion from deck to grave. Auxilla on its own solves a ton of the issues in Centurion, namely in that it's a level 8 that you can actually go into on turn 1 for more access to interaction points by searching the trap or by finding further extension pieces, which also does mean that the Calamity lock that Centurion was already famous for is now even easier to achieve. It also makes
they still had Calamity, didn't they? Yeah.
Centurion package desirable for other strategies that need easy access to synchro lines, in addition to any way into a level 8 synchro now also being a Centurion combo, making Wakaushi a desirable option for the deck. Damn, Calamity has to get banned now, right? Varudros, the final bringer of the end times, has a rank 10 that can detach for an Omni Negate and an additional detach for a pop when you do. If it attacks while it has material, can pop a card, and if destroyed, pops another card.
They should just put like a paper in the card design office where they just put a bunch of rules on that they just follow while designing cards. And number one rule should be stop putting Omni Negates on generic extra deck monsters. Because like we finally got rid of Baron, Savage, Apo in 2024, but we got Varudras instead. Like just stop doing that. Stop doing that, man.
While a rank 10 Omni Negate is a lot harder to utilize than a level 10 Synchro was, Varudros would actually have a home...
I mean, Desiree is not generic. Like, yeah, every once in a while, they're going to make cards that negate other cards. That I guess I can live with that. Because as soon as... if Fiendsmith rotates out of the game, then that card is gone. These cards stick around forever. You know, like, they make Baron, and it's here for years. Until they eventually get rid of it. Finally.
almost instantly in specifically Yubel, as level 10s are fairly easy to access for that deck, especially now thanks to Nightmare Throne. Searches or destroys from deck a 0/0 fiend on activation. Searches Yubel when a Yubel monster leaves the field.
What deck really uses Varudras besides Yubel though? That's not the point. The point is that they're gonna deal with Yubel as a deck, and then Yubel is gone, but Varudra stays, which limits all future design for level 10 monsters, because as soon as a deck comes out that can spam level 10 monsters effectively, it now has an Omni Negate. I can't be the only one that understands why that's a problem for future card design. Similar to how Baron was a huge issue. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't love the fact that Desiree is an Omni Negate as well, but the fact that, like, these generic cards exist, it just makes it so that every time there's a deck that has level 10 monsters, it'll now have an Omni Negate, whether they want that or not when they're designing the archetype, right? It's the same with every deck that has tuners can access an Omni Negate if the levels add up to 10, as long as Beatrice was legal. Not Beatrice, Baron.
That is one level higher or lower than the one that left, then summons it, ignoring summoning conditions. Gruesome Grave Squirmer can summon itself from hand if you control a fiend, popping a Yubel or Mentioner on field when you do, and can be banished from grave to summon a fiend with 0/0 from hand or grave. Throne specifically would be massive for the deck, now able to search for Dark Beckoning Beast and Samsara D Lotus, effectively giving the deck 4 more starters between its...
Look, once again, another hot take. Yubel was not really a deck. Yubel was just an engine. Because what Yubel cards did the Yubel deck actually end on? I'll tell you what it was. It was a Phantom of Yubel. They ended on one Yubel card. Technically, the Yubel deck was more of an Unchained endboard than a Yubel endboard. It was just generic slop. You know, there was a Phantom of Yubel, and that's it. They did none of the quote-unquote cool things that they designed around Yubel. They didn't end on Samsara D Lotus to negate an opponent's monster effect. They didn't end on a searchable eternal favorite to super poly your opponent's monsters. They didn't do that once they reached a certain point of power level. They just went Varudras, Phantom of Yubel, Unchained combo with Unchained Soul of Rage and the trap card, and whatever else it did, like Desiree, you know, like it was just slop. It lost all of its identity because of those generic cards.
And terraforming, and Throne being able to pop Spirit from deck itself is another starter, as there is a slew of lines that you can now make through Dark Beckoning Beast that makes Lotus almost irrelevant. The only real issue is that Nightmare Throne mentions Yubel monsters multiple times on the card, but not Yubel herself, meaning that the field spell is not searchable within the archetype, suffering from the same issues as Eye of Timaeus. Squirmer is also a great piece of extension and insulation in a way, as since its summon effect is a quick effect, you have the option to summon it in chain to something like Imperm to remove the Imperm target from the field so that your effects can properly resolve in the grave. YCS Rio de Janeiro would be held just a week after Destruction's release, and though Snake Eyes was clearly still the dominant deck in the room, a couple of shifts had happened with the new set's release. For starters, the Fire King variant had fallen off hard here, dropping from its dominance to only taking 2 total slots in the top 32. Secondly, while none would be prevalent enough to claim a true second best deck position, a couple of decks would put up showings to back up a claim for that spot, specifically in Voiceless Voice, who continued to show promise through the entire last format too, and newcomer Tenpai, who would actually do solidly with all of the generic Omni Negate bosses removed from the meta.
Bro, no man, I'm not ready. 3 Pydra, 3 Chundra, 3 Kaiman, 3 Summoning. 3 Prosperity. Oh my god.
Though the deck had a difficult time playing into Appaloosa still. Speaking of which, the third shift would be the appearance of yet another set of engines in the Snake Eye arsenal, with Melodious popping up here as both Refrain and Ostinato provided full 1-card combos for Snake Eyes, providing them easy access to lines in addition to Appaloosa for insulation against hand traps, and Kashtira becoming a household name again, being an engine used by first place Rafael Marino Reich. By opening Diabellstar and Raitsoth, one could weave through the Kashtira line to get Unicorn to search Birth, which gives you material enough to access the necessary material to hit Appaloosa with an IP protection, all before the usage of original Sinful Spoils, which could then get you to the full Snake Eye combo. Following 3 weeks later after this event was the release of Rarity Collection 2, which despite being a follow-up to one of the best received sets of all time was really a disappointment overall, only sporting a small handful of relevant...
I still disagree with that, by the way. I still think Rarity Collection 2 was good. Look, you'll hear a lot of criticism from me throughout 2024, like you have so far. I do think Rarity Collection 2 was good. It was not as good as the first one, but it was still
reprints, and mostly being a site for retro play reprints, namely that of Edison with higher rarity hits. YCS Indianapolis would be the
It
next
is probably the worst out of the rarity collections, but it was pretty good.
And we'd see the meta slingshot back into a Snake Eye dominated space once more, taking the event piloted by Paulo Goncalves da Silva. This would lead into our next side set with new cards, being hotly anticipated.
Snake Eyes have won every single event so far, right? Like every single one, I think, was Snake Eyes.
Specifically for what archetypes it would be supporting into the modern era. Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge. Release date, June 21st, 2024. Set type, import set. Major strategies, Gen X, Ritual Beast, Yubel. Impact, a newcomer to Rogue and a kick up the tiers. Terminal Revenge, as a side set, held a lot of intrigue behind it, specifically because it would be importing the Terminal World set from the OCG, being a pack designed specifically around printing legacy support for 4 of the dual terminal archetypes from between 5Ds and the Arc 5 eras, which are some of the most beloved archetypes in the game's history. Granted, with every one of these kinds of releases, some archetypes are going to be treated better than others, and sadly, Ice Barriers was sort of doomed from the word go, namely in that the cards introduced were supporting the newer structure deck support for the archetype rather than the original game plan, which to be fair was the correct thing to do, but at this stage the archetype wasn't really worth salvaging, though it did give one specifically good card. Mirror Mage of the Ice Barrier is a level 2 Aqua Tuner that when sent to grave can search for any Ice Barrier card from deck to hand, which can search the previous Freezing Chains of the Ice Barrier, which can revive an Ice Barrier on activation. All of the stars align for this card.
Ice Barrier cards were cool. I mean, Ice Barrier, unfortunately, due to a decision that was made like, I don't know, 15 years ago, has a bunch of, like, a very high focus on floodgates somehow, which has never been what people played when they played Ice Barrier cards back in the day. For the most part, the only really good Ice Barrier cards back then were like the extra deck monsters, which was like the Brionac, the Trishula, and to an extent even the Gungnir that saw some play back then, which I feel like would have been a really cool focus for the deck. But instead they decided to focus more on the floodgate capabilities of it.
Specific usage, being a level 2 water aqua that if dumped from deck searched the spell
Dueling,
that revived it, and just like that, Swapfrog once again became a power player for Sprite decks. Because Swapfrog can dump any level 2 aqua, it can dump Mirror Mage, who searches Freezing Chains, which revives it, and boom, instant access to either a rank 2 or a level 4 Synchro, which means access to Totally Awesome or Herald of the Arclight, once again bringing Omni-Negate access to Sprite in a much easier form. Infernoid Evil is a fusion of 2 Infernoids, banishes an Infernoid in grave on fusion summon to dump Infernoids up to the banished one's level from deck, and if sent to grave, searches a Void spell trap. Flood is a link 4 requiring at least 1 Infernoid, contribute a monster to negate an inherent special summon, banishing it, banishes a card on board if a card on grave is banished, and if destroyed, floats into
I've never messed around with these cards, and I don't know why it is, but I don't personally vibe with the Infernoid archetype. I know it has a lot of fans out there, but I've never been one of them. I still can't tell the OG Infernoids apart from each other. I don't know who's the Harmadic and who's the Saitsamus and who's what the Atondal. I don't know, dude.
Infernoid from deck, ignoring summoning conditions. Void Reignition is an int archetype card destruction for yourself only, and can be banished from grave to return up to 11 different Infernoids from banishment to grave. Void Breach boosts an Infernoid by 100 for each banished Infernoid, and can once per turn either recur a banished Infernoid or special an Infernoid from hand, ignoring summoning conditions. A solid bout of support for Infernoid, especially given their recent top via the Snake Eyes. But sadly, this support would miss the mark quite heavily due to requiring that the new spells be effectively played with pure Infernoid, and because Evil has no real way to summon in archetype except Imagination, which gives your opponent the agency to control an extra deck monster first, means that you're in no way going to be able to resolve that spell. Our Gen X Undyne can banish a Gen X from grave.
Oh yeah, the Gen X support, that was a flop.
And tuner status if applicable, and can recur itself and another Gen X from grave if you control a Gen X Synchro. Turing can summon itself from hand if you control a Gen X in the opponent's main phase, then quick Synchro summon a Gen X Synchro, treating itself as a 1, 2, or 3 for that summon. Arms of Gen X Return 0 is a level 10 Synchro requiring a Dark Tuner, can negate and destroy a monster effect by...
Okay, the Synchro is actually quite solid and has a chance to see play at some point, I think. Like that, this is a very powerful level 10 Synchro, especially in a world where Baron is now banned. If a deck has Dark Tuners, this is a card to potentially take a look at.
Banishing a like attributed Gen X from grave, able to use it once per attribute per turn, and can shuffle up to 6 Gen X's with different attributes in grave or banishment to deck to pop that many spell traps on board. Repair Gen X Controller is a Gen X locked Link 1 that can recur a Gen X on Link Summon, and if a Gen X is added to hand except by drawing, you can normal summon it once per chain. Okay, this card is a Darth Nash wet dream, and yes, there is a near infinite looping conga line of assholes that this can access thanks entirely to the R Gen X line searching another level on normal summon. But this is also the most impermeable monster in existence, effectively locking
damn art repair Gen X controller, you look mighty impermeable.
in that it's the coolest Link 1 a deck could ever get, but sadly won't be enough to make them meta. Spiritual Beast Tamer Laura has the same special summon restriction as her kin, can discard herself to extra normal and RB, can banish herself from grave to protect an RB from destruction, and if banished can summon an RB from deck. Ulti NAWCQ Draco has the standard ulti materials, can contact fuse from field or grave by banishing materials, prevents targeting other RBs, and can return itself to extra to summon any one banished RB, locking its direct attacks. Ulti Retiari is a generic Link 4, locks...
Okay, we definitely just called this thing by the name of the Gladiator Beast, right? We just called this Retiari. I did not just hear that. I'm not the only one that just heard that, right?
Locking its direct attacks. Ulti Retiari is a generic...
Yeah. That is the name of the Gladiator Beast.
Generic Link 4 locks both players from tributing to activate cards or effects, can spin back a banished RB to normal another RB, and can banish an RB and...
Why was Ritual Beast so strong in Master Duel? Ritual Beast in general, I'm pretty sure when I saw these cards for the first time, of course I realized that contact fusing from the graveyard is kind of crazy for Ritual Beast. I did not realize how good this deck was going to be. I do think this is one of the more underrated themes that came out in 2024. Which is, funnily enough, the same thing that happened in 2015 when Ritual Beast came out for the first time. You know, like, it came out, but everyone had their eyes on Necros, but then it just turned out this whole sort of Ritual Beast, Canohawk, Turbo kind of deck is actually quite annoying to play against, kind of good. And the same is true with the support, like 10 years later, almost, it caught people off guard once again because people just underestimated the complexity of this deck, actually making it quite viable for people that put in the time to learn it and master it. It's like, even after I've played a fair amount of Ritual Beast at this point last year, I still don't consider myself even close to like a good Ritual Beast player. It's pretty darn complex. And the new, like, even though the Ritual Beast end boards, despite, like, if you discount the cards like Protoss and Colossus and other floodgates that they had access to, the Ritual Beast end boards were quite breakable without those cards, but the follow-up for this deck was also crazy, because once everything was banished, it just has infinite access to whatever you want to do.
And an opponent's card on their turn. Inheritance drops opponents by 200 for each type among your RBs on board, can reveal...
It was just a good mix. You know, it was just a very, very good mix of support cards. Very efficient. It's not that many cards, but you get a consistency card with Inheritance. You get a great extender and way to play through stuff with the new main deck, Tamer Lara. You get a great new like engine tool, like stuff that facilitates your combos with the new contact fusion, and you get a new end board piece with Ulti Rotari, right? So it's just like it's just a very good combination of things.
RB in hand to search a different typed RB, then discard a card, and if 2 or more monsters are special to your field at once, you can swap a monster's battle position. Ritual Beast just got about everything they could have possibly wanted here, and it's not even funny. Lara by herself would have been an incredible piece of support. The extra normal is both a tamer and a spiritual beast for fusions, floods further when banished for any number of RB effects or for the new fusion, and is just all around an incredible support piece for RB. Ulti NAWCQ Draco being able to summon itself by banishing materials from grave is another Lara enabler and gives repeatability to your ulti RBs, since its tag out, though it only hits one, can hit any RB name, meaning that can actually hit another banished fusion, which in turn gives access back to 2 names if needed. Ulti Retiari is an odd floodgate, but it can just auto-win certain matchups, and can just banish cards on a quick effect, which in turn leads credence to NAWCQ Draco's repeatability. Another notable point is that it's summonable with Bond, being being a spell that can now cheat out a Link 4, which is just extra hilarious.
People didn't
All
really
in
do
all,
that.
Ritual Beast absolutely made it out best from the dual terminal support cards, and hopefully with such a wave they can potentially see the rogue tier moving forward. There were also a couple of other random OCG imports here that would be worth noting, specifically in those of Winkaribo level 6, being considered a favorite card, meaning it could be weaved into the existing hero lines, though is very much optional. Dragon Master Magia, a quarter-century secret rare exclusive, being extremely difficult to find, as you can ask Ruxin, being a solid negation option for Blue Eyes decks to tinker with, but sadly locked at around a $750 price tag, and Phantom of Yubel, a fusion of Yubel and a 0/0.
It was such a cool set until this point. I hate this card with a burning passion, dude.
Fiend can be
I hate what this card did to the Yubel deck.
used by returning materials from hand, field, or grave to deck, has Yubel protections, and when the opponent uses an effect, contribute yourself to make the effect, your opponent destroys one Yubel in their hand, deck, or field. So notably this card was insane. Yubel now had hand trap insulation, being one of their most major flaws that not only deletes the hand trap's effect, but actively pushes your own plays forward, easily summonable with any number of Yubel lines.
You know what's crazy? Is the fact that when this card came out, I'm pretty sure I remember myself being excited for Yubel just because of how desperately I wanted a shakeup from Snake Eye. Just to realize, like a couple weeks in, that it's just the same deck. It's just the exact same concept. And I was like, finally something that isn't Snake Eye. And then I realized, oh shit, now there's two of them. It was so frustrating.
Recurs back your pieces for the grind game, and notably is not actually once per turn, meaning it can be used as extension too. This one card would unironically rocket Yubel up in playability, but only results would tell if it would be enough to combat the Snake Eye onslaught. The Central America WCQ would begin the WCQ season that same weekend, and instantly
just to put this into context, the Yubel deck here, the only reason why it's not represented more often is because Snake Eye was just the same deck, but better. It still is do not let that distract you from the fact that it's an incredibly busted deck. Also, there's no Fiendsmith yet.
In the meta, taking the third overall representation slice for the top 64. Utilizing a number of Fiend support pieces from over the years between Dark Beckoning Beasts, Sharvara, and now easy access to Cross Sheep's Revive effect via a fusion monster, Yubel now had no trouble setting up play lines simply with the added flexibility of Phantom to the deck. Sprite would also see a couple of top spots here sporting the new Mirror Mage package, allowing Swap Frog to once again be a one card totally awesome for the first time since the Ronin ban. Luis Gabriel Romo Rosas would take the event on Snake Eye, which despite the new cards entering the meta remained the sole tier 1.
Every single tournament recap so far has been, this new deck saw play, this new deck saw play, this new deck also saw some play, and here's the winner list. It's still Snake Eyes.
Deck standing at the top, which didn't seem to be changing anytime soon. South America the next week would reinforce that point, though notably two contenders were finally putting up enough results to be qualified as tier 2 decks, being those of Tenpai and Yubel, both of which were also rising in popularity due to being anything that wasn't Snake Eye. Centurion would be another deck that broke into top cut here, and it was going through a renaissance of sorts, namely in that the Melodious cards could be used to access their full engine of options thanks to the standard Apo and Banshee line accessing Trudea, which just happens to be Pyro, meaning that you can now Calamity Lock the opponent under an Apo with just Ostinato. What a time to be alive. Juan Carlos Latorre Infantes would take the event on Sprite, being the first time since Poplar's release that Snake Eyes didn't take a premier level event, utilizing the new Mirror Mage package for quick and easy access.
It's crazy that this is the first deck that isn't Snake Eye to win an event in 2024. That is so funny, actually.
To Toad. Oceania would be the same weekend, and shockingly, the Fire King variant would shoot way back up in results, marking itself the second best deck at the event once again. Ritual Beast would also see its first top since Terminal Revenge, notably also playing Banshee for accessing Nemesis Flag, which can spin back any of the banished RB names to summon itself and search Protoss, which can easily just win you games once you have a clear lock on the opponent's primary attribute. Or you can just call Fire, you're bound to get it right most of the time. Fox Chun-Li would take the event on Snake Eyes Kashtira, but was quite notably playing an FTK package within his build here. Utilizing Unicorn and Diabellstar for the standard Draco Sack line as expected, you could instead of going for Apo, pivot through Proxy F Magician to fuse a token and a Snake Eye into Blaze Phoenix, who standardly burns for 3k on his first usage, link it off for Promethean, then bring it back to burn for another 3k, then lastly link up into Zealantis to reset the Phoenix effect for the last 2k. The downside to this was that this was heavily interruptible, but at the end of the day, if it failed, you could always just go back to the Snake Eye end board as expected. These developments were...
There is zero bricks in this main deck due to the FTK. Like, this FTK option is 2 extra deck slots. There's like nothing in your main deck that you have to dedicate to the FTK. By the way,
if it failed, you could always just go back to the Snake Eye end board as expected. These developments were still showing Snake Eye as the deck to beat for these events, and with 2 more WCQs being the biggest ones still to come, all eyes turned to the 3rd core set of the year to see if something would change. And change it would.
Man, you cannot be serious. 2024? What the hell, man? Now is the time to release Gimmick Puppet? Oh my god, dude.
The Infinite Forbidden. Release date, July
How is Yu-Gi-Oh still here, man?
19th, 2024. Set type, core set. Major strategies, Fiendsmith, Millennium, Gimmick Puppet. Impact, Rapier 2.0. The Infinite Forbidden was the 3rd core set, blah blah blah. Okay, let's just cut to the chase. Fiendsmith Engraver can discard itself to search a Fiendsmith spell trap, can send an equip card and another card to grave once per turn, and if
White Forest kept me alive, dude.
Then Grave can shuffle a Light Fiend from grave into deck to revive itself. Lacrima is a fusion of 2 Light Fiends, drops opponents by 600 attack, summons or recurs a banished or graved Light Fiend on fusion summon, and if sent to grave, shuffles a Light Fiend back into deck to burn the opponent for 1200. Desiree takes Engraver and 2 Light Fiends, can negate cards on the board up to the link rating of equipped monsters to itself, and if sent to grave, can shuffle back a Light Fiend from grave to send a card from field to grave. Requiem is a Light Fiend locked link 1, contribute itself to summon a Fiendsmith from deck, and when sent to grave, can equip itself to a non-link Light Fiend on field as an equip.
Okay, so what I'm gonna say now is probably an unpopular opinion, and I know it is. This first wave of Fiendsmith support was pretty toxic, but once Fiendsmith became its own strategy with the new Lacrima and stuff like that, I actually quite enjoy pure Fiendsmith as an engine. I do not like what it does to combo strategies and how it improves decks like Snake Eyes at the time and stuff like that, and it's exactly what we're seeing in Master Duel right now. The use of Fiendsmith in Master Duel right now is something that I don't enjoy at all. But once it will get its own deck, like once we get Lacrima and once you can play like Fiendsmith Control and whatever, I think that's when it becomes fun. It's just the problem with Fiendsmith, once again, I think it's that it's a little too generic.
Spell that gives 600 attack. Sequence is a link 2 requiring at least 1 Light Fiend, can fusion summon a Fiend by shuffling materials from grave into deck, and can equip itself from field or grave to a non-link Light Fiend to give that monster targeting protection. Tracked searches a Light Fiend, then discards a card, and can be banished from grave to fusion summon a Fiendsmith. Sanct summons a Light Fiend token on activation and can be reset from the grave if a Fiendsmith is destroyed by an opponent's card effect. Fiendsmith in Paradise sends all cards to grave except a level 7 or higher Fiend and can banish itself from grave when the opponent special summons to dump a Fiendsmith from deck or extra to grave. So initial thoughts here is that this core is kind of insane. Going Engraver for Tracked for Fabled Lurie gives access to Requiem, which in turn gives you easy access for another Engraver, the ability to summon back the first Engraver with its own effect, and there's material for a rank 6 right there. You could use this to access Wave King High Caesar prior to initiating any combo in deck, providing an Omni Negate insulation point. Or you can even access Beatrice, which as covered earlier can access a wide range of options now, but most likely will be accessing a rollback line. The other option is to continue forward from there and to sequence to access Desiree with the materials up at that point, which with a sequence would have the 2-point negate, though this option is heavily susceptible to interruption. The other side of the line is that any way to access Requiem could also be full Fiendsmith combo with any additional body by summoning Requiem, using it to get to Engraver, linking off the Engraver and extra body for sequence, firing it to summon the Lacrima, reviving the Engraver, and making a rank 6 from there. Because of this, leading up to release, many decks tinkered with what generic Light Fiends one could use to access Requiem, including but not limited to Armades, Exciton, Nightmare Griffin, and even Mellow Melody the Brass Shin. However, we got a much simpler answer through the OCG imports here. Moon of the Closed Heaven is a generic Link 2 whose effect should basically not be printed on it because at the end of the day, she's a generic Link 2 Light Fiend. Meaning
That's the crazy part. Her effect's actually quite cool. The going Moon into Underworld Goddess is actually quite the fun play.
Now, anyway, into 3 monsters is a full Fiendsmith line for a rank 6. On top of all of this, Beatrice being able to dump Snake Eye Ash, then link her and the sequence off for Promethean Princess, means that you can now actually perform a full Snake Eye line off of any 3 monsters, which could be a starter, or just make Caesar if you already have a Snake Eye starter, which is a very easy ask. All of this is to say that...
I mean, we're not even mentioning... The thing, that's the crazy part. It still sounds incredibly broken, but they're not even mentioning the optimal combos for it. Like, we had Appaloosa. So it's not about... Caesar is not an Omni. Caesar just protects you from Nib. But people just made Appo.
No matter what deck you were looking at for the format, one of the first things added in was a Fiendsmith engine of 3 Engraver, 1 Tract, and 1 Lurie alongside the extra deck pieces. And the fact that this set released the day before the NAWCQ is almost criminal, and we have barely scratched the surface here on what these can do. Millennia Monk can summon the unstoppable Yugioh Incarnate by revealing all 5 pieces of Yugioh from hand, deck, or field, then shuffles all monsters you control except level 10 and higher Yugioh monsters and Millennium monsters, shuffling itself back to deck after usage. The unstoppable Yugioh Incarnate is a fusion of the 5 Forbidden One monsters, can't be destroyed by opponent's card effects, gains attack equal to your life in battle, can negate a spell trap once per turn, and can set an Exod or obliterate.
Yeah, the funny thing about the unstoppable Yugioh, surprisingly stoppable.
Great spell trap from deck in each end phase, also forcing the controller to lose 1,000 life each of their standby phases. All of the higher level Millenniums share an effect to activate themselves from hand as continuous spells, then can pay 2k or reveal a Millennia Monk in hand to summon themselves from there, with Sangenjin being immune to monster effect destruction and searching a Millennium monster when summoned with its effect, Golem preventing the negation of Millennium Ankh and searching a Weiju Temple when summoned with its effect, and Shield being immune to spell trap destruction and searching an Ankh when summoned with its effect. Maiden and Fiend Reflection have the illusion gimmick, can make themselves continuous spells that summon when the opponent takes an action, and each gives an effect on summon this way, with Maiden giving higher level illusions and spellcasters targeting protection, and Fiend Reflection gaining life equal to half the attack of a monster on board. Weiju Temple can activate a monster from hand as a continuous spell to set up a Millennium from deck as 1/2, and gives all Millenniums the Crystal Beast fallback effect. Obliterate Blaze gives a level 10 or higher Yugioh the ability to pay half your life points to nuke the spell trap zones, then equips the 5 pieces of Yugioh from hand or deck to it as equip spells, boosting by 2,000 for each and giving piercing damage. Exod Fires of Rage, if you control a level 10 or higher Yugioh, nukes the opponent's board and can be banished from grave to search an Yugioh piece, or shuffle up to 5 back from grave or banishment. So a far more interesting take on Yugioh than we've seen in a long time, Millennium takes a bunch of the old vanillas from the McDonald's promo days and retrains them into a machine entirely focused around the unstoppable Yugioh. But the issue lies in that as far as towers go, he's not even that great of a towers, though does pack an incredibly powerful punch.
I mean, I do like the fact that it's not just a towers, you know? Like, it's just, once again, this deck has a lot of synergy with Floodgates, which is not its fault, it's just the fault of the Floodgates existing. Because genuinely, like, this deck has a very, very efficient game plan outside of the fact that it has to play the OG Yugioh pieces, which is kind of shitty. But for the most part, like, just activating the Millennium Ankh, which is very hard to get stopped, just summoning a spell trap negation and setting a trap that destroys your opponent's board is pretty efficient. It's a pretty efficient game plan that could potentially even be good enough if people played like normal interaction in it. The problem is it just has too much synergy with Dimension Shifter and all other floodgates, you know?
For the short term, though, would be that of Sangenjin searching Golem, Golem searching Temple, Temple setting Shield, and Shield summoning itself to give you 3 monsters onto the field and a monster from hand in the spell trap zone, all for the cost of 6,000 life points without using the normal summon, which made it a perfect fit to be splashed into decks looking for Requiem access. That's right, it's actually just more Fiendsmith. Though this engine was not the most popular, it would absolutely see play, namely for the fact that Snake Eyes actually got even more benefit from it, with Temple putting the Snake Eyes in the spell trap zone, providing even more synergy. Gimmick Puppet Little Soldiers dumps a different leveled Gimmick Puppet on summon, copying its level, and can banish itself from grave to boost 2 Gimmick Puppets on board by 4 levels.
This archetype, look, I'm sorry, Gimmick Puppet fans out there, if you exist, I don't know, all 2 of you, but I do not understand who in their right mind made Gimmick Puppets and said, like, yeah, let's make that a concept. we've spent so many years. We've spent so many years getting rid of even the most niche FTK cards on ban lists. Because we realized that having FTKs in the game is not a good play pattern. It's not it does not make your game any more attractive to its player base and to new players if FTKs exist. There's the most outrageous random FTK enablers on the ban list, like freaking Phoenixian Cluster Amaryllis, which I have played against Phoenixian Cluster Amaryllis less times in like 20 years of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Than I have played against Gimmick Puppet within like a month after its release. And still, those kind of cards are banned for the sake of keeping the game healthy and not making FTKs like a thing. And then there's Gimmick Puppets, which the entire thing of the archetype is FTKing, and it has a field spell that makes everything unaffected by your opponent's monsters as well, just to make FTKs even easier and less interactive. There's very few things in Yu-Gi-Oh! That I understand less than the decision to create Gimmick Puppet and make it a thing. Like this I do not understand in the slightest. I have zero understanding for who made this and why they did.
Rogue Doll can reveal a Gimmick Puppet from extra to summon itself and a puppet from deck with the same level as the revealed monster's rank, and if sent to grave, adds herself back to hand. Cattle Scream can summon itself from hand or grave by detaching an Exceed material from your board, and gives its Exceed a once per turn revival from the opponent's grave to their board. Fantastic's Machinex is a rank 8 that can detach to search or rank up magic spell, gives an extra machine normal, and can summon itself from grave to either board when you special summon a Gimmick Puppet Exceed, recurring a rank up magic when you do. Fanatic's Machinex is a C exceeds a Fantastic's Machinex that searches a puppet trap on summon, can detach to summon a monster from either grave to the opponent's board, and when a monster is summoned to the opponent's board, pops it to burn them for half of its original attack. Mansion of the Dreadful Doll searches a Gimmick Puppet on activation, protects Gimmick Puppets from battle destruction, and gives them immunity to the opponent's monster's effects, except for Exceeds, and can detach an Exceed material from your board to summon a Gimmick Puppet from your grave to the opponent's board. Service Puppet play steals monsters up to the number of Gimmick Puppet Exceeds you have and can banish itself from grave while you control a Gimmick Puppet Exceeds to summon an Exceeds in grave to either field. So, Gimmick Puppets have for a while now been attributed to degenerate play patterns, namely thanks to that of the Nightmare lock that Branded is still hung up on, but this time the degeneracy comes from being given a 1-card FTK. Thanks to the field spell getting you to Little Soldiers and providing protection from any monster effect hand trap, Gimmick Puppets now has the ability to loop Dark Strings thanks to searching and recycling Argent Chaos Force, to trigger its pop and burn 3 times over in a turn to burn for
None of these words are in the Bible!
For over 8,000 damage. While extremely consistent, the primary issue the deck faces is that Imperm completely steals your lunch money, leaving you for dead to one of the most common hand traps in the format. Still, Gimmick Puppet was a solid rogue option from this and would see play as such. A Stellar of the White Forest can send a spell trap from hand or field to grave
Finally, we're healing.
To summon a Light Spellcaster Tuner from deck, and if a spell trap is sent for a monster effect cost while in grave, can revive herself. Elzette can send a spell trap to summon herself from hand, then search a white.
Do y'all remember when on release, Stellar was the more expensive secret rare than Elzette because every single YouTube combo started with a Stellar, and then everyone realized that starting with a Stellar was like by far the most susceptible way to start into hand traps you could ever think of, and it was always just better to start with Sylvie because that was a guaranteed tuner on your board. It was such a massive bait, dude. Like, I remember when I prepared White Forest Runic for Euros, I started with 3 Stellars, and it just gradually, until I completely removed it from the deck, because it was just like so bait.
Forest monster, and if a Light Spellcaster Tuner is summoned on the opponent's turn while in grave, she can recur herself. Sylvie searches a White Forest spell trap on summon and can bounce a White Forest Synchro on board or in grave to summon itself from grave with its effects negated. Rucia can summon herself from hand if you control a White Forest, can pitch a spell trap to draw a card, and has the same revive effect as Sylvie. Silvera is a level 6 Synchro Tuner that flips all opponents' monsters face down on summon and boosts illusions and spell.
I think White Forest itself is super dope. I'm a huge fan of the White Forest cards. I think it does have some tendencies to be turned into some very combo heavy slop, especially in Master Duel right now because of like Beatrice still being legal, so Fiendsmith can access it via a Stellar, an Elf, and Baron is legal, and Apo is legal, and all that stuff. But like the pure White Forest or White Forest Runic stuff is just I thought it was wonderful.
caster synchros by 500 and gives them double piercing. Resilia is a level 6 synchro tuner that pitches a spell trap on summon to search a white forest card or light spellcaster and boosts illusions and spellcaster synchros by 500 and gives them immunity to the opponent's card effect destructions. Diabell is a level 8 synchro that, if made with a tuner synchro, recurs a spell trap and can pitch a spell trap when the opponent activates anything to summon a level 7 or lower synchro tuner from extra, grave, or banishment. All of the White Forest spell traps reset themselves if pitched for a monster effect cost, with Tails searching a White Forest monster if you control an illusion or spell.
I'm mad at Tales of the White Forest. This card just makes me angry because it's a Rhoda that doesn't work at the start of the game. The concept of this card is very annoying to me. I hate Tales of the White Forest.
Spellcaster, beware popping an opponent's card if you control a level 6 or higher illusion or spellcaster. Susurrus, bouncing an illusion or spellcaster you control to summon another from grave or banishment. And Woes, summoning a White Forest monster from hand or deck,
Woes,
then
dude.
synchro
Such
summoning
a
a
fun
White
card.
Forest synchro. An interesting initial way for an archetype for sure. With a solid board starter and a stellar lines, White Forest as it stood wasn't quite there yet as a standalone deck to be a consistent face in the meta, though still could be both seen in a rogue setting as well as potentially as a splash in a deck that has abundant access to level 2s and spell traps. Tenpai Dragon Genroku summons itself as a tuner if searched and increases its level by 1 and contribute itself to summon a Tenpai Dragon from deck.
Y'all are looking at Yubel Fiendsmith, Snake Eye Fiendsmith, and Tenpai format right now and are telling me Runic White Forest is the problem? Shut up. Without Baron, I may add. Without Baron. You're acting like the deck I topped Euros with not probably one of the coolest decks in Top Cut there. Shut up.
Dora searches a level 4 or lower fire dragon on normal and can excavate the top of the deck, pitching it if it's a fire dragon and boosting itself by 1,000 or placing it on the bottom of the deck. These two serve as more one-card play starters for Tenpai, with Dora getting access to Genroku, who'll summon himself, or to Chandra, who can use it as a dragon for its summon condition, and Genroku being able to tribute itself to do the full Tenpai line, though notably does lock you to dragons at that stage, so it sort of becomes a do or die line.
Oh no, I'm locked into dragons! I'm limited to 37,000 damage now. What am I gonna do?
Clan's Sleepy can summon itself from hand if your monster has been destroyed by a card effect that turn, can fusion summon a memento on summon, and if destroyed can dump a memento card from deck. Memento Mit Clan Tekulika Creation King is a fusion of 3 mementos, can banish itself from grave to search a memento clan, dumps 3 memento cards from deck or extra on fusion summon, and can quick effect pop mementos you control and cards the opponent controls. Sleepy gives another access point for the fusions, and Creation King provides a new worthwhile end boss, but the issue lies in that anything you could be doing with this archetype, you could be doing with Fiendsmith better. Or at least that's what I would say if there wasn't a TCG exclusive that came down at the last minute. Aerial Leader is a fusion of 2 fiends with the same attribute, can dump a fiend on fusion summon, and if engraved can banish 2 level 6 or higher fiends with the same attribute to resummon itself. While Fiendsmith can easily pivot its way through this in their normal combo line and the Lacrima pool.
At the time, we were so mad that they made Aerial Eater a Necroquip Princess. We were so mad at them. Anyone remember that? We were so mad because it just looked like they wanted Fiendsmith to be even stronger than it already was. When in hindsight, they probably made those cards so they could ban Fiendsmith Lacrima, which was something we didn't know at the time, which I think in hindsight was a good decision overall, but still, at the time, we were so mad that they made those two.
Most decks wouldn't really care for it with a Fiend Dump, except for specifically Yubel and Memento, who could use the Fiend Dump as a way to set up their...
Yeah, but like, I genuinely... Since Aerial Eater has come out in Master not a single person has summoned it against me. Because Master has Fiendsmith Lacrima, and everyone is doing that.
Main combo line, then go into Caesar without having to commit the rank 6 to Beatrice for the dump instead. The other TCG exclusive fusion would be Necroquip Princess, a fusion of a monster equipped with a monster card and a fiend monster card, can contact fuse by sending materials on board to grave, and when a monster is sent from hand to grave as cost, can either draw a card or equip one of those to herself as an equip spell that gives 500 attack. Necroquip was a far more interesting piece for the Fiendsmiths, namely in that it could be summoned without the need for sequence or track fusions.
I mean, the main reason why this card was so broken is a very subtle one, because specifically, if you go 2 bodies into Moon, into Requiem, into Engraver, that Engraver is stuck on the field and you can't get it off the field to bring it back. So at that point, you need a 3rd monster You need a third body to do sequence into full Fiendsmith combo, which NAWCQ Prince has circumvented that issue by just going equip Requiem to Engraver, send them both to the grave for NAWCQ. Then you can bring the Engraver back, and then the NAWCQ is your second monster to make sequence with, or Caesar or whatever, right? So that's why NAWCQ was solved so many problems for Fiendsmith at the time.
We'll send an Engraver with Requiem equipped and the Requiem itself as material, since its requirements specify a Fiend monster card rather than a Fiend monster, meaning you can achieve a rank 6 with the Fiendsmith engine off any 2 cards now thanks to Moon for Requiem, for Engraver, for NAWCQ, revive the Engraver with its effect, and all without burning the Lacrima or sequence effects, meaning you still have them in reserve. This wouldn't be an immediate
but you did do that. You did burn sequence. You would go NAWCQ plus Engraver into sequence, into Lacrima, revive Engraver, make rank 6 if you wanted to.
For the deck, namely because it wasn't really able to be labbed out prior to the NAWCQ being a TCG premiere, but over time would be a go-to for the extra deck lineup of Fiendsmith brews. Drytron New 2 can summon itself if you control a Drytron card, and searches a Drytron monster when special summoned, locking you to machine rituals that turn. Medionis.
This is still hilarious to me because this support is, they're very good cards, but they basically say, hey, Drytron players, you can have good support, but you cannot do Herald or any other stupid stuff anymore if you want to do this. And the Drytron community just denied it. They were just like, no, we would rather do some degen stuff than end on this new cool boss monster. We don't want that. Thank you, Konami, but no, this is not degenerate enough.
DA Draconids gives other Drytrons effect destruction immunity, can banish Drytrons from grave to negate a monster effect with less or equal attack to the banished Drytrons twice per turn, and if destroyed by the opponent, floats into another ritual with 4k or less attack, considering it a ritual summon. So Drytron here got a 1-card starter thanks to Nova summoning New, which can now actually trigger immediately to get you your standard Drytron line going with a starter and tribute fodder piece, though notably would mean that Drytron needed to change its core over from the Ritual Fairy direction it had been going in for years at this point due to the machine ritual lock, but the door had now been opened for innovation. Centurion Atri can be considered a tuner or non-tuner for a synchro summon.
Once again, for each somewhat playable card for Centurion, there's an absolutely unplayable one like Emblema Salvation.
Draws a card on summon if you have both Emblema and Centurion cards in grave, and has the Centurion Trap resummon effect. Emblema Salvation banishes a Centurion from Spell Trap Zone to banish an opponent's card, and if popped while face down, puts 2 Centurions from hand, deck, grave, or banishment into the Spell Trap Zone. A tree would actually be fairly important for Centurion in that it was finally a second tuner for the archetype, reducing its reliance on Primera for everything. Silhouette Rabbit is a generic Link 2 that has the illusion effect, sets a continuous trap monster from deck on Link summon, and when a card from the Spell Trap Zone is summoned as a monster, pops a spell trap on field. Silhouette Trick summons itself as a monster on activation, negates the effects of monsters up to the number of illusions you control on special summon, and has the standard illusion effect. While an interesting combo of cards that could be generically played in anything, Silhouette Rabbit would be seen more as a tech option for some decks at the time, being used either for its intended target of Trick or for something like Azuroon, which trades the imperm effect of Trick for a summon negation. Lastly, Mulcharmy Perulia can be discarded if you control no cards to draw 1 card for each normal or special summon the opponent does from hand that turn, shuffling back cards at random from hand at the end of the turn until your hand count is equal to the cards your opponent controls plus 6 or less. An extremely...
This just reminded me of that drawback again. It's so funny, man. Why did they just not leave that off? It's so irrelevant. Plus 6, dude.
Interesting crack at a potentially balanced version of Maxi, Perulia would not be anywhere near as broken as the banned Cockroach, namely being a side deck card against matchups that have a lot of hand summons.
Plus
like
6 is so funny.
Though the wording of its effect made it clear that it wasn't going to be the last, as it hinted that there would be other Mulcharmies in future sets. The North American WCQ was the same weekend as Infinite Forbidden's release, and with Fiendsmith in tow, Snake Eye would take a comfortable, but not overbearing, Tier 1 finish. With the addition of the new Fiendsmith cards, the extra deck continues to tighten down, only having about 2 flex spots left at this stage, with first place Aditya Darep using Silhouette Rabbit and Nightmare Phoenix in those slots, but those were by no means the only options available, with other popular options including Access Code, NAWCQ, Dark, and Ptolemy M7, with many players opting to side deck 1 or more of these to slot in those as tech spots. Necroquip was not very popular for this particular event, although in hindsight it was probably the absolute best card to fill that slot, giving far more accessibility to your Fiendsmith lines and threatening the free draw if interrupted or in response to your own hand traps. Yubel was arguably the deck that got the most out of the new TCG exclusive fusions, specifically that of Aerial Eater, turning the Fiendsmith line into more than just a Beatrice factory for this strategy specifically, allowing the rank 6 slot to instead be filled with Wave High King Caesar, who insulates your line. Tenpai's meta position rose quite substantially with the recent support, with Fadra getting cut down to the mandatory 1 in service of the new play starters, in addition to more weight being placed on Dimension Shifter as the go-to hand trap. Gimmick Puppet would see a couple of tops here, unsurprisingly using the cards that can utilize rank 8 plays better than any others right now, the Horus engine, which gives easier access to your FTK rank 8 lines thanks to the materials being generic. Similarly to Yubel, Memento took the Aerial Eater release and ran with it, allowing the deck to have a more reliable one-card starter thanks to the Fiendsmith engine. Wrapping up the WCQ season would be the European WCQ a week later, and once again Fiendsmith Snake Eyes would come out swinging to take the top deck position, though it wouldn't take the event overall. Esteban Ree would take the event on Tenpai, trimming the fat of the deck down to the core Tenpai cards, Perulia, and Shifter, and beyond that maxing out on every good board breaker available, including Lightning Storm, Dark Hole, Raigeki, Feather Duster, and Droplet for knocking out those hard-to-hit cards. There were a couple of other new innovations in the format as well. Though it was theorized prior to release, Magical Musketeer ended up being the perfect engine for Fiendsmith, namely thanks to the entire archetype being Light Fiends, with any normal summon making Max into Requiem, which provided another Light Fiend engraved for fusions and spinbacks. White Force would see its first top, though not in the way most expected. Thanks to the main core of level 4s just needing access to a level 2 non-tuner and spell traps for the pitch-offs, Runic ended up being the perfect mix-in archetype to cover their shortcomings, with any of the level 4 White Force and a Runic spell being full combo, giving access to Racilla and the White Force side of the deck. YCS Sacramento would follow the end of the WCQ season about 3 weeks later, and with the format solidifying following all the results from the last 2 WCQs, Fiendsmith Snake Eyes would be in a very comfortable tier 1, with Fiendsmith Yubel following behind at a clear tier 2 position. Jesse Cotton would take the event on Fiendsmith Snake Eye, once again tying up the record for most YCS wins at 6 total with LeBlanc. Another extremely important note for this particular event was the absolute prevalence of the Fiendsmith engine, which had fully come into its own as a Zodiac engine of sorts, being in 27 of the top 32 decks in some regard, so this next part is going to bring me a lot of joy personally. A new ban list would take effect on September 2nd, specifically to address some of the major outliers from the WCQ season that were quite egregious with the release of the Fiendsmith engine. Newly banned were Appaloosa, Beatrice, Lacrima, and King Calamity. Wait, Lacrima? I'm going to pause here because this is an absolutely massive sight to see. Lacrima was banned just 52 days after its release, beating the previous record of 81 days held by 6 Cents. This was now the fastest release to ban timeframe we have ever seen in the game's history, which we will talk about shortly. Newly limited were Ava, Gimmick Puppet of Strings and Dark Strings, Snash, Poplar, Branded Fusion.
This list, no matter what you say, this list was a freaking banger. Okay, this list was a freaking banger. Appaloosa, Fiendsmith's Lacrima, like so quickly, touching Gimmick Puppet slightly, even though I don't even know if that was the right hits or not. I still don't know months later, but this was a banger list.
Spirit Gates, Prosperity, Song and Summoning, Grass, and Skill Drain.
Now, it wasn't enough because of how broken ass the format was in 2024, but still, this was a very good effort.
Newly semied were Blaster, Ebe, Lunalight Tiger, Redox, Tempest, Colossal, and Tidal. Lastly, unlimited were AFD, Armageddon Knight, Denglong, Kirin, Plushfire with an Errata, Red Rose, and Time Seal. Okay, back to Lacrima. Banning Lacrima made a lot of sense, as it was the card that enabled a lot of what made the Fiendsmiths oppressive, but at the same time, with labbing that had been done on Necroquip Princess, it almost seemed like an unnecessary hit overall, which simply removed some of the options from Fiendsmith, but not the potency of its engine. King Calamity's ban was a foregone conclusion, especially with the added Centurion support waves. The far more impactful hits here were absolutely Appo and Beatrice. Appo lines that rush her to insulate mainline combos were abundant, and in an era where hand trapping is more important than ever, she was absolutely the most important hit with the departure of the generic Omni's last ban list. Beatrice was the far more impactful hit to Fiendsmith, as by removing her, most decks lose their mill setup tool, though quite notably, Fiend decks still had one thanks to Aerial Eater. This meant that now, running the Fiendsmith engine with NAWCQ could only really get you a Caesar, which while still powerful was nowhere near as flexible as Beatrice was. As for the other hits and releases, Snake Eyes take a fairly heavy hit with both Ash and Poplar, meaning that landing a hand trap on one was actually now detrimental. Spirit Gate seems nonsensical when Dark Beckoning is still at 3, though I do get it. Summoning taking a hit also makes Tempai a lot more vulnerable, yet still easily able to OTK, and Branded Fusion is a hit that's been a long time coming at this stage. In the Unlimited camp,
here's the thing with that list is like, of course, as someone who didn't like Snake Eye, Yubel, or Tenpai, I was not a fan of most of the meta decks in the format. Of course, I wanted it to be more drastic. In an ideal world for me personally, I would have liked it to be more drastic towards those decks. But now we're rewatching the year, and I'm like, I understand from their perspective that they're not murdering those decks just yet. Because, I mean, they've been pretty dominant, but a lot of them have also just came out in the grand scheme of things. So I get why they're trying to make them weaker instead of killing them first. Like, it's just something that if you don't like a deck, it's the kind of deal where you can't wait for it to die. So it's nothing they do is it's gonna feel fast enough or appropriate. But like, this was still a pretty good ban list.
Real eye catchers outside of Grass coming off the banned list, but still just being at 1 is going to limit its usage quite heavily, but opens left arm offering shenanigans again. The 2024 World Championship would be a week later, and a quick note, though Lacrima was just banned, because our list came out so close to Worlds, Lacrima would still be legal for this event, and as such, Fiendsmith would be the primary face of the event, with Tempai and Ritual Beast sprinkled in for good measure. Ruben Andres Penderanda of the United States would take the event on Fiendsmith Yubel, marking both the second year total and the second in a row that the US has won the World Championship. This would lead into the next release? I don't know, it only had 3 new cards, but I need a section splitter. Dueling Mirrors. Release date, September 20th, 2024.
Dude, these were such a dud. These were so disappointing. Because it's like, when I heard that they're bringing back new cards from the Megatins, I immediately thought like, oh god, the last time they did this, it was Nibiru, Shifter, and Dark Ruler No More, which in all of these cards individually were huge for the game. So I had huge expectations for this, and then it was
type, import, reprint. Major strategies, Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Impact, look it tried. Dueling Mirrors was touted as this massive celebration of Yu-Gi-Oh's history to help wrap the 25th anniversary celebration, but in reality was an overbloated set with minimal reprints to actually help the rapidly rising price of the game as a whole, which is sad because that's usually the main selling point of these tins. It would also bring 3 new cards in Thea the Primal Being, Mind Castlin, and Heavy Polymerization, but none of these were relevant at all, so let's just move on. YCS Lyle would be a week later, and with the most recent ban list hampering Snake Eye's performance here, Yubel would rise into the dominant meta position, taking first place piloted by Noel Hamill, utilizing the now weaker but still potent Fiendsmith engine. NAWCQ would take up the Lacrima slot for most builds, providing the fusion point to get to a rank 6 in...
I mean, here, realistically, between, like, this is the unfortunate part. As much as I stand by the fact that that was a good ban list, the power level of the game was so high that for the play patterns and stuff, it didn't change anything. Like, banning Lacrima was a fantastic decision, but Fiendsmith remains just as powerful. Hitting Snake Eyes decently well was a good decision, but Yubel was just there to fill its position. Banning Appaloosa was a phenomenal decision in the long run for Yu-Gi-Oh! But guess what? Yubel has, like, just Phantom of Yubel, which is essentially as playing against Appaloosa, right? Like, it's the same dynamic. So, in the short term, this ban list was not that effective. In the long term, it was a great ban list, though.
Caesar. But for decks like Yubel, the loss of Beatrice wouldn't sting as much thanks to Aerial Eater getting you the mill you needed to start with and still going into Caesar after the fact. Snake Eye was still able to take tops, though was considerably weaker thanks to losing 2 Ashes and the Beatrice setup pivot, and as such, builds that do well from here on are probably relying on supplemental engines, like in this case Kashtira, to keep the deck running. Plant Link would top here, as between the Aroma support back in Phantom Nightmare and the Ragnaraikas in Legacy, Plant had received a number of tools over the last few months, but still required an extremely dedicated pilot to go far with the strategy. Runic White Forest would see another top here, but another build utilizing the toy cards would also top, using them as a way to get to your level 4 lights thanks to Toy Soldier. A Team YCS in Santiago would be held the same day, and overall we'd see much of the same results, with TCG, Life, and EXO taking the event on 3 different but mostly similar Fiendsmith Yubel lists. YCS Cancun would be a week later, and much of the same results would stick, with Team Samurai X1 taking the event overall on Fiendsmith Yubel, adding an additional Kashtira package for that extra push in. The ability to stick Unicorn can standardly win you most matchups, as if you get hand trapped, you can rip a card from their extra deck, which both cripples them and tells you what deck they're playing. Thanks to their new support, a pivot had been made in Drytron away from the Herald plays of yesteryear into an actually Drytron boss-focused strategy. Part of that is thanks to
No! What is the boss monster in this strategy? It's not they Draconids, it's freaking Vanity's Ruler.
Power of TA Draconids, but also because new 2 off Nova can instantly set up your Drytron lines as a 1-card combo now, but locks you to machine rituals in that process, meaning the previous win con of Herald is out. Thankfully, not all generic ritual pieces are out though. As Bato Buster is still a machine ritual, you still have a decently generic Omni Negate to access through it and unlocking. Leave it to Jesse Cotton to play Crystal Beast and top a YCS. The main idea is that Sapphire Pegasus is a 1-card rank 4, which means access to Snake Eyes, which also holds synergy with the Crystal Beast thanks to them being continuous spells off of their effects. Crystal Beasts have also gotten some of the most broken pieces of support for their archetypes over the years, but standardly have gone overlooked due to being Crystal Beast cards. Golden Rule represents 3 summons with Ruby Carbuncle, Rainbow Bridge of the Heart is an extra normal, Spell Trap Searcher, and Board Breaker, Crystal Bond is a searcher and setup tool, etc, etc. All of this would lead into the last core set of the year a week later, and with the meta effectively stagnant thanks to the lack of new releases this year, many look to it to hopefully provide some kind of substantial shakeup to get us out of the same decks we've seen for months at this stage. Rage of the Abyss. Release date October 11th, 2024. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Azumina, Merlantian, Fiendsmith. Impact if Max C was so great. Rage of the Abyss was the last core set of the year, and as such, with all of our major meta developments coming from core sets thus far, a lot was riding on this one to help shake up the seemingly stale meta that the lack of new releases had caused. The Hallowed Azumina pitches off Sinful Spoil cards to fusion summon an Azumina monster with a level equal or lower to the number pitched times 4 without its materials, and if engraved can shuffle back an Azumina monster from field or grave to shuffle itself back into deck. Ilia Sylvia is a level 6 taking an illusion and a light spellcaster, doubles Azumina damage other than itself, contribute itself to negate any effect, and when destroyed searches a Sinful Spoils trap. Mu Risilago is a level 6 taking an illusion and a light spellcaster, drops opponents by 500 attack and defense for each Azumina you control, searches an Azumina.
Here's the thing, I do like the Azumina cards, but I mean, nothing changed about my perception of them at the time. I was mostly frustrated with the fact that they were most synergistic with the Snake Eye portion. And I also don't like the fact that Ilia Sylvia just is an Omni Negate. I think that is a very lazy way of making a card interesting. But Azumina, the concept itself, I find fun. Yeah, I don't know. It all circles back to I don't like Snake Eyes. And so I also didn't enjoy some of the cards that came out because they supported Snake Eyes specifically.
Spoils card on Fusion Summon, and when destroyed, searches a Sinful Spoils spell.
I do like
Azumina.
Azumina.
Thon is a level 6 taking an illusion and a fiend, sends a card on field to grave on Fusion Summon, and recurs an Azumina or Sinful Spoils card in the standby phase. Moa Regina is a level 6 taking an illusion and a level 6 or higher fiend, can revive an illusion other than another copy of itself, and pops up to 2 cards on field with an Azumina.
Isn't Azumina literally Snake Eye support? I mean, in some ways, yes, but like it does also see play in like White Forest and other decks. Like it has synergy with other decks. It's just at the time of release, why would you play those other decks if Snake Eyes exists? You know, like why would Murcielago ever search any of the other Sinful Spoils cards when original Sinful Spoils just represents what it represents? You know, like it doesn't make sense. From you're trying to win a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Why would your Sinful Spoils of choice ever be the White Forest, one of the trap cards or whatever? Like, why is it not? It's always original or wanted for Diabellstar for original if you're trying to win.
or Sinful Spoils card effect is used. Debtors pitches a Sinful Spoils to fusion summon an Azamina monster with a level equal to or lower than the number pitched times 4 without its materials as a quick play spell. It can be banished from grave to revive an Azamina. Deception of the Sinful Spoils, contribute a monster from hand or field to search an Azamina card, steals 1500 life from the opponent if a monster is sent to the grave while you control an Azamina, and can reset itself from grave in the end phase if sent that turn from field while face up. Determination, fusion summons an Azamina by shuffling back Sinful Spoils from grave or banishment for every 4 levels, and can banish itself from grave to reset a Sinful Spoils spell trap from grave, locking it from use that turn. Immediately, these would be recognized as more Snake Eyes, which by proxy it was, being a part of the same lore series. Deception on its own can get you to Hallowed to move Risalago to original Sinful Spoils, which in turn is full Snake Eye combo, but it also makes the Diabellstar starting point better by giving her a way to maneuver into Ilia Sylvia and search a Snake Eye Ash without burning the normal, then do the Snake Eye combo under an Omni Negate. This was an incredible revitalization point for Snake Eyes, who were in a pretty rough spot meta-wise after the Beatrice and Lacrima bans, so any boost to their viability would be appreciated. Abyss Shrine the Atlantean Spirit is always considered a mermail as well, contribute itself from hand with another mermail or Atlantean to either search or summon a level 7 fish, sea serpent, or aqua monster from deck, for which we'll refer to as the tri-type for this section, and can banish itself from grave on the opponent's turn and discard a card to draw one. Mermail Shadow Squad is always considered an Atlantean as well, can discard a card to change your water monsters to level 7, and if sent to grave to use a water monster's effect, summons a level 4 or lower Atlantean or Mermail from deck. Poseidra Abyss, the Atlantean Dragon Lord, is a 3 material rank 7 that can also exceed summon over an Atlantean or Mermail Exceed, can detach 2 materials to dump a water from hand or deck to bounce up to 3 opponent's cards to hand, and if sent to grave after being Exceed summoned, can discard a card to summon 3 level 3 or lower tri-types from hand or grave. Mermail King Abyss is a link 3 taking at least 1 tri-type, locks targeting water monsters it points to with card effects, searches or equips to itself an Abyss equip spell if a water monster is sent to grave for cost, and if destroyed by the opponent, searches an Atlantean or Mermail monster. Abyss Ting Triana summons an Atlantean or Mermail from hand or grave, equipping itself to it, can block destruction of the monster by sending itself to grave, and can banish itself from grave.
I won't rant about Mermail anymore. I've ranted about this deck so much in the past. All I will say is that it is crazy and really puts things into perspective that a deck this powerful on release was basically ignored because of how strong 2024 as a year was in terms of power level. The fact that no one really looked into this deck until months later is kind of crazy.
To shuffle back up to 3 tri-types from grave or banishment. Quick note add-in, there's also now an area the water channeler to match the previous Hita. Ditching all pretenses, Atlantean and Mermails are now the same archetype, as they always have been played together. This would be a solid modernization of the classic Zexal era strategy of Merlantian. Abyss Shrine gets you any of your big Mermail bosses quickly while also triggering an Atlantean effect, and gives you easy ways to trigger them on the opponent's turn with her grave effect. Shadow Squad makes accessing the rank 7 pool easy, and has a deck cheat out when you inevitably pay for a water effect with them. Poseidra is easy to access thanks to Abyss Gaios, can bounce a board and then soul charge back a bunch of bodies when you inevitably link him off for King, and King gives targeting protection and easy access to the Abyss equip line, getting access to Triana for the recursion. This would also bring Deep Sea Minstrel back into talks as a way to trap dust shoot the opponent and trigger your Atlantean effects, which was always considered a desirable effect regardless of the format. While clearly not a top tier threat, as most of these legacy waves aren't, Merlantian would clearly be positioned as a potential rogue deck for the new format, which is another notch into the ever-growing pool of rogue. Lacrima the Crimson Tears is always considered a Fiendsmith, dumps a Fiendsmith card from deck on summon, and can shuffle itself back from grave on the opponent's turn to revive a Fiendsmith link. Agnum Day is a link 3 taking at least 1 light fiend that can revive a non-link light fiend on quick effect and equip itself to that monster.
I just want to say I'm sorry, Agnum Day. I wasn't really familiar with your game like that, because I thought when Agnum Day, when these cards came out, I looked at them through the lens of just Fiendsmith combos, and in Fiendsmith combo decks, you don't really play Agnum Day, and Lacrima is just like a max one of. But I really enjoyed or I still enjoy the Fiendsmith control that these enable. So like this is from my perspective, this is one of the best ways to make a second wave of support for a deck, to not just like, it doesn't really play much into the engine slop combo that Fiendsmith was doing. It just gave Fiendsmith its own identity, which I think is really cool.
Giving it 600 attack for each link rating equipped to it and piercing damage. Agnum Day exists. Lacrima, though, is an extremely
Shut up.
interesting point, as she proved to be another one-card starter into the Fiendsmith lines, namely in dumping an Engraver on summon, linking into Requiem to summon another Engraver from deck, reviving the dumped Engraver, and making Wave High King Caesar just in time to block Nib or to access Sequence, or in terms of closed heaven lines, let your Requiem hit Lacrima instead to dump the Engraver and set it up to come back and get you to Sequence off of just closed heaven. But in a lot of ways, we already had that through Necroquip lines using the Engraver Grave effect. The main thing that she does is acts as a normal summon that is the full Fiendsmith line, or gives you a sequence line with an additional Light Fiend Engrave, which in turn means it's easier to access Desiree. Heart of the Blue Eyes is always treated as a Millennium card, can't swap control, can discard itself to search Millennium Ankh, and if you've used Millennium Ankh this duel, in grave can send a monster the opponent summons that is level 8 or higher or has 3k or more attack to grave to summon itself back once per duel. Giving Millennium another way to Ankh and more ways to actually interrupt thanks to its grave effect, this gives the deck better consistency that's not nearly as reliant on Exodia, so the pure variant might actually see some play now. Memento Talon Acheron on summon makes level 9 and higher monsters able to attack directly that turn if destroyed by card effect, recurs a memento from grave or banishment, and can revive itself if a memento in hand or field is destroyed. This gives Memento a body that comes back each turn quite easily, but beyond that is a touch bricky. Still, it's a nice piece of recursion for Memento and would see play as a one-off because of that. Centurion Chimeria can turn an opponent's chained effect into your...
It's such a common theme. Look, you cannot tell me that Centurion support is high quality. Come on, let's be real. For every good Centurion card, they release like 3 duds.
Opponent places one Centurion monster from their face-up field or grave into their spell trap zone as a continuous trap, and has the standard Centurion trap summon effect. Primaria Primus is a level 8 generic synchro that can't be destroyed by battle if summoned from anywhere but the extra deck, searches an emblema card on summon, and pops a card on each side of the field, and revives itself when the Centurion leaves the field by the opponent's card effect. Chimeria wasn't nearly good enough to include, despite being effectively a negate, but Primaria Primus being a level 8 stepping stone that can search your emblemas and come back as an annoying indestructible by battle bungus, makes it a great inclusion for Centurion, especially since it was generically makeable, making the synchro engines like Super Heavy Samurai a much easier sell for the deck now that emblemas were findable with more methods. Fire King Courtier Olconix pops a fire on field or hand on summon to search
this dude was like a year late.
Fire Beast Tri-type from the deck, making its level match the search, and if destroyed, floats into Fire King High Avatar Garunix from deck. A card that the OCG got very shortly after the Fire King structure deck release, Olconix gives Fire King another starter that can pop a random fire in hand to search Ponix, who can then trigger and start your lines while also being usable later in the turn to pop for any of your various Fire King effects to float into a level 8 for Exceeds or Link plays. She can also search for Sacred Fire King Garunix,
not too late for
Kirin to make
Dinkabui,
herself
that's
a
true.
level 8 and enable Exceed plays earlier in the turn, which in turn can convert into a negate via Photon Lord or Titanic Galaxy, with Photon Lord giving you the hand trap insulation. Olconix would be an extremely powerful option for Snake Eyes in any scenario where you have a one-card starter that doesn't need the normal 2, which would re-raise the popularity of the Fire King variant of Snake Eyes yet again. Dominus Impulse can be activated from hand if your opponent controls a card, negates a special summon effect,
Rhoda was a
and
really
destroys
good
the card
set.
too if you have a trap engrave, but locks
Rhoda
you
was
out
a
of light,
very
earth,
good
and
set.
wind effects for the
Holy.
remainder of the game after activation. An absolutely powerful hand trap, but that drawback immediately locks it from usage in a handful of decks, but notably didn't affect the current best decks in the format revolving around Darks and Fires. Lastly, and absolutely most importantly, Mulcharmy Fuwalos has the same effect as the previous Perulia, but for monsters summoned from the deck or extra deck. This was the true Maxi successor, being far more applicable than Perulia's hand version, as almost every deck in the game will summon cards out of the deck or extra at least once, if not multiple times in a turn, which in turn means that effectively it can be Maxi under the right conditions, and as such became a staple 3-up hand trap for the format moving forward to no one's shock. YCS Niagara Falls would be the same weekend, and without missing a beat, Snake Eyes would reclaim the meta-dominant position that it had lost from the last ban list. As it turns out, the Azamina cards were absolutely incredible for the strategy, providing a new one-card line for Snake Eyes that included insulation from one hand trap, which was becoming more and more relevant with the previous limits to the deck. Fire Kings would also resurface as a substantially viable route for the deck, taking the event piloted by Landon Oliver. Both the addition of the new Azamina pieces and the new Olconix would propel the deck to reclaim much of the glory the deck had lost once the pivot to pure Snake Eyes happened, as well as the inclusion of the newer hand traps in Fuwalos and Dominus Impulse.
I think it's also worth mentioning that this the reintroduction of Azamina cards and basically bringing back Snake Eyes to the format did come at a cost of the deck being more susceptible to certain hand traps like Droll and Retaliating Sea, which is why we're seeing those making a resurgence. Which ultimately, while Snake Eyes was still meta, it was weaker. It had more weak links in its setup and stuff like that.
And the new Olcanix, as well as the addition in a few variants, the highest placing of which would go for the 60 card limit and add in other engines like the Millennium and Kashtira engines, in addition to various hand traps and equalizer options. Millennium would see its first top here in the pure variant thanks to the new Blue Ice piece, giving more interruption outside of Exodia, which specifically can cause odd interactions in Snake Eyes by outing Flamberge early or by removing a Yubel without triggering her destruction effect. YCS Guayaquil would be 3 weeks later, and Snake Eyes would continue its newfound dominance, taking the event with the Fire King variant piloted once again by Landon Oliver, being a nearly identical list to the one he just won Niagara with. Fluwandereeze would also see a top here for the first time in a while, namely thanks to Dimension Shifter continuing to be one of the best hand traps in the current format to help counter the Grave combo decks. Following this event would be the Quarter Century Bonanza a week later on November 8th, bringing a massive wave of reprints to the meta that were released pre-2024, such as Flamberge, SP, and even some 2024 pieces like Promethean Princess, in addition to a dedicated slot in each pack for retro format reprints like
this was an absolute banger, dude. That's a cold take.
Like Goat, Edison, Tengu Plant, and Clown. YCS Bologna would be 2 weeks later, and notably would be the largest non-WCQ event of the year with just over 2,500 duelists, enabling a top 64 cut. Mermail would see a top 8 finished, as being a deck that natively can access Bahamut for Toad was always a plus, but with the new support it became painfully easy to just go off under insulation to make massive problem boards. Another shocker to see here in top 8 was actually Orcust, with the Horus cards already making rank 8s easy. Access to draws and mills is simple, and getting Orcust set up is a cakewalk. Matthew Bricard would take the event on Magical Musketeer Fiendsmith, utilizing the Magical Musketeer.
I will say, I do think looking back at it, Rage of the Abyss was probably the start of the game healing a little bit, you know? In the grand scheme of things. Like, this is where I think the game starts healing from Snake Eye Tenpai Yubel stuff, you know, like this is essentially where we are headed now, hopefully with Master Duel soon.
Effectively as Fiendsmith starters, similarly to how we saw earlier in the year, but has cut all of the fluff out as it's effectively just a Fiendsmith deck now. Starfire and Calamity effectively can be used to either start your Fiendsmith lines with a max in between to fluff out your light Fiend count, or to flood board further by using Tracked in the same column behind Starfire to access Calamity. Also, Eccentric doubles as a Fiendsmith starter and has removal for both monsters and spell traps that just happens to be searchable via Tracked, which would be played at 3 here thanks to the influx of Light Fiend targets. This would lead us into the last set of the year, and if it was anything like the previous side releases, it would be reasonable not to expect too much from it in terms of a shakeup. But this time, it wasn't just a standard import set, it was the first deck build set we've seen in over a year.
Ryuge.
Crossover Breakers. Release date, December 6th, 2024. Set type, deck building set. Major strategies, Ryzeal, Malice, Ryuge. Impact, a breath of fresh air to the format. Crossover Breakers was the first deck building set we've had in over a year at this stage, with the last one being Valiant Smashers back in November of last year. As such, the 3 archetypes contained within had the expectation on them that they'd be solid strategies, but need a wave or 2 to get going. Not the case here. As it turns out, all 3 of the strategies here would be playable on release, so let's take a dive into each individually before we get too ahead of ourselves.
Did they say all 3?
Ryzeal can summon itself from hand if you have a Ryzeal on field or in grave, and searches a light Pyro on summon. Node can summon itself from hand if you have an Exceed on field or in grave, and can send a card from hand or field to grave to revive a Ryzeal with its effects negated. Ice Ryzeal can summon itself from hand by pitching a card from hand or field to grave, and on normal, special summons a Ryzeal from deck. Ext can summon itself from hand by dumping an Exceed from extra on summon, and searches a Fire Thunder monster if you only control rank and level 4s. Palm Ryzeal can be summoned from hand by shuffling back a Ryzeal from hand or grave, and if it battles a monster, can dump a level 4 from hand or deck to boost its attack by that dump monsters. Duo Drive is a multi-mat rank 4 that gains 100 for each material, can attach a Ryzeal from grave as material on summon, and can detach 2 to search 2 different Ryzeal cards. Detonator is a multi-mat Ryziel locked rank 4 that can detach a material when the opponent uses a card or effect to pop a card on field, can attach a monster from grave as material on summon, and can detach to protect and exceed from destruction. Plug-in summons a Ryziel or exceed from grave or banishment, then attaches a Ryziel card from deck to a rank 4. Cross can bottom 2 Ryziel cards in grave to draw a card, and can detach from a Ryziel exceed to negate an opponent's monster effect at the point of resolution. Plasma Hole pops cards up to the number of Ryziel exceeds you control, then attaches a Ryziel card from grave to a rank 4, and can be banished from grave to quick exceeds using a Ryziel. It's been a while since we've had a much more straightforward deck with the power of the meta, but here we are. Ryziel on the surface is a far simpler deck than any Snake Eyes, Fiendsmiths, Yubels, or Azaminas, but still has the power to compete with the top strategies thanks in large part to their simplicity. With every monster in the deck being an extender, it doesn't take much to get going, standardly ending on at minimum a Duo Drive, a Detonator, and Cross Up, which can use the materials under Duo Drive to negate a monster effect at resolution. Detonator also has a lot of malleability against specifically this meta, as it makes it difficult to establish a board when anything that activates or uses an effect can cause a snipe out. Notably, this stops any continuous or field spells in their tracks, so Snake Eyes and Yubels lose power spells from their strategies. It makes it nearly impossible to Snake Eye combo since you can't keep key pieces on the board.
How did this kick out Snake Eyes Azamina? That is a good question, actually. I will say that I did not expect it. Like, I played in the, I think it was the very first YCS after this came out at YCS Anaheim, which happened very, very shortly after this released. And I did not personally think it was going to be that dominant over Snake Eyes. I thought it was going to be like a mix of both. Like, I thought Yubel and Snake Eyes were still good, and I still respected them in deck building a lot for that event, and it just turned out they weren't that popular anymore, which was either, I mean, honestly, it's just something that you have to guess, because I do still think that Snake Eyes were powerful, but maybe there's a factor to, like, people were tired of it, and Ryziel just promised a shakeup while still being good enough to compete. Same for Malice. Like, it was just good decks that were different from the decks that people have been seeing all year. So I think there was a lot of hype surrounding them at release.
It will always come down with at least 3 materials since it reattaches a monster from grave to it as material. X can also cause some fun interaction with its summon effect, as you can send any exceeds to grave for summon, meaning that
it is true though that Snake Eyes being like mostly reliant on Azamina to start its combos has a rough time into Detonator, and it is really hard to prevent Detonator from happening. So like the Ryziel deck specifically was pretty good against those.
You can send something like Aggregator for its summon to act as an imperm, then reattach it to Detonator to use its effect later.
Do you think Ryziel will still be oppressive in Master Duel even with Snake Eye and Yubel still around? I mean, if Ryziel releases next, which would roughly be accurate to the real life release schedule, right? Like Ryziel and Malice would be up next at some point. I do think Ryziel, if Snake Eyes is at a stage where Beatrice is banned and it basically is at this level, right? Like Snake Eyes in Master Duel right now is almost like Snake Eyes in the TCG at this point in time, just plus Appaloosa, right? So yeah, I think a full power Ryziel / Malice release would rival Snake Eyes and Yubel.
A secondary effect for Detonator's pop. Ice is obviously the most desirable starting point since it's a tour guide for the archetype effectively, but notably is also a level 4 pyro, meaning that it's accessible with Bonfire, once again making the spell one of the most relevant rotas we've had in years. It says a lot about an archetype this simple on a surface level holding so much potential, so
and
we'll put
OSS,
a pin in this
for this YCS, OSS was legal. So no, I'm not forgetting it. You're just not listening.
Conversation until we can talk about the YCS after this release. All of the Malice main deck monsters resummon themselves at a cost of 300 life once per turn when banished. White Rabbit blocks damage from Malice links that point to it and sets a Malice trap from deck with a different name than those engraved on summon. Chessy Cat banishes any monster destroyed in battle with a Malice link that points to it and can banish a Malice card from hand to draw 2. Dormouse gives Malice links pointing to it effect destruction immunity and can banish a Malice monster from deck.
All right, I'll give you this much, Malice enjoyers. I don't like Malice, but compared to what happened previously, it still is a lot better than what happened beforehand. Like, it's still, I'll take Malice over Tenpai, Yubel, and Snake Eye any day.
Deck to boost Malices by 600 for the turn. Each of the Malice.
If combo decks have to exist in Yu-Gi-Oh and they have to be like somewhat powerful, then I think Malice is still a step in the right direction compared to what happened beforehand.
Links are Link 3s,
give you
requiring
that.
a Malice that can also summon themselves when banished by paying 900 once per turn, with an added effect when you did. Red Ransom banishes a Cyberse from deck on its banished summon, swaps the attack and defense of an opponent's effect monsters while pointing to a monster, and searches a Malice spell on summon from anywhere. White Binder draws a card on its banished summon, can banish up to 3 cards from the graves on summon from anywhere, and can set a Malice trap from deck or grave once per turn. Heart Cipher doubles its attack on its banished summon and can quick effect shuffle back a banished Malice card to banish a card on field, with it being non-negatable when pointing to a monster. Malice in Underground banishes a Malice card from hand, deck, or grave on activation, boosts Malice links by 3k if you have 3 different Malice traps banished, and locks the opponent to only attacking Malice links. All the Malice traps can be activated the turn they're set by banishing a Malice on field, with MTP07 searching a Malice monster, then banishing a card on field if you control a Malice link, GWC06 summoning a Malice from grave or banishment, then gaining life equal to its attack if you control a Malice link, and TB11 summoning a Malice from deck or a Malice link from extra if your opponent has 3 or more cards on board, locking that monster's attacks and effects for the turn. Malice was a very interesting Cyberse deck in that it operated on a different axis than most others, but ultimately is wanting to build towards the same goal of terahertz. Thanks to Dormouse banishing White Rabbit out of the deck, White Rabbit coming back and searching TB11, linking off the 2 into Haggard Lizardos. God, the TCG exclusives coming up in the weirdest places. Or into SP if you're basic, banishing the Dormouse from grave and bringing her back to link up into Red Ransom, searching the field spell, banishing Red Ransom for TB11 to grab more material, resummoning Red Ransom and banishing Dotscaper from deck, which then will also resummon itself. This alone leaves you with material for lots of different branching combos in Malice, with access still open to the generic Cyberse options like Link Decoder, Splash Mage, and Heat Soul, but also giving you easy access to the rest of Malice thanks to the field spell being in hand ready to activate and banish any of the other links you might pivot through. Probably one of the biggest draws to the deck is its desire to play with its cards being banished, meaning that Dimension Shifter has once again found a deck that it can be comfortable in on a similar level to Flu, which leaves Malice in a really interesting position opposing Ryzeal, solidly as another meta contender for this new format. Kaioru Ryuge Kaiva can spin itself back to hand to search a Dino Domains, can summon itself from hand if 2 or more cards were destroyed that turn, and can place a Dino Domains from board on bottom of deck to pop cards on the field up to the number of different types on the field. Cairo Imva can discard itself to search a Sea Spires, can summon itself from grave if 2 or more monsters were sent from hand or deck to grave that turn other than itself, and can place a Sea Spires from board on bottom of deck to banish the opponent's hand, then make them draw the same number of cards. Genro Hakuba can banish itself from hand to search a Wyrmwinds, can summon itself if a monster is banished while it's already banished, and there are now at least 2 other banished monsters. And
I'm still pondering on the that we said all 3 archetypes were playable right out of the box, basically.
Wins from board on bottom of deck to add a Ryuge card to hand from deck, grave, or banishment. Sosei Misva is a ritual pendulum who in scale can search a non-pendulum Ryuge card, then pop itself, and can summon...
I will say, for Ryuge, I think the concept of the boss monster is actually quite cool. The fact that they decided to make a ritual pendulum that kind of functions that way is, I think that was pretty cool.
Itself when a monster is destroyed while in face-up extra by tributing a level 10 Ryuge, then pops up the 2 cards you control to place that many Ryuge continuous spells from deck face-up onto the board. Rising searches a Ryuge monster, then can add a Ryuge pendulum from hand to face-up extra deck, and can banish itself and another Ryuge monster from grave while you control a Ryuge pendulum to summon a Ryuge with the same type as the banished monster from deck. Warzone searches 1, dumps 1, and banishes 1 dinosaur, sea serpent, or worm from deck on activation, locking you to those plus dragons for the turn, and if you have a Sosei Misva in your face-up extra, can summon 3 Ryuges with different types from deck, grave, and banishment, 1 each. Dino Domains boost a Ryuge by 300 and gives Ryuge pendulums and level 10 plus dinos the effect of...
it's a cool concept, it just sucks that basically the entire deck is full of bricks, because there's only few cards that actually do anything.
Bottom a Ryuge continuous spell on board to negate a monster's effect with less attack. Sea Spires gives Ryuge's battle destruction immunity and gives Ryuge pendulums and level 10 plus sea serpents the effect to bottom a Ryuge continuous spell to bounce a card on field on a quick effect. Wyrmwinds is macro from the board for both players on the opponent's turn and gives Ryuge pendulums and level 10 plus worms the effect to bottom a Ryuge continuous spell on board to drop a monster's attack to 0 on a quick effect. And Rivalry summons a Ryuge from hand, deck, or grave, bouncing it in the end phase, and can be banished from grave to bottom a Ryuge continuous spell from board, grave, or banishment to draw a card. Ryuge has a bit of the Valence effect to me, where my eyes glaze over every time I start to sit down and read these effects, but after 3 or 4 attempts, the strategy seems to be more of a splasher for other decks in the tri-type than it does for its own standalone game plan. There are some things you can do involving setting up the 3 level 10s as a 1-card combo from either Rising or Mistva, using 2 to set up Varudross since it's a worm and plays under the lock, and leaving up either Kaiva to use Dino Domain's Monster Negate or Emva to use the Sea Spire's targeted bounce, then being able to convert that remaining level 10 into a Mistva when Varudross negates and pops, which in turn can convert your Warzone and use Varudross into any 2 continuous spells out of the deck, but that's not particularly impressive when you consider that almost every deck right now can do something similar. However, Warzone being able to search anything in the tri-type provided you can hit 1 card of each of the remaining 2, does mean that it's able to completely ignore the Ryuge cards on search and set up weirder lines. Since you can search Warzone with Mistva, you can use Warzone to search for any singular card in the tri-type to then dump and banish the corresponding Ryuges from the other 2 tri-types, then use Warzone's second effect to bring out the 2 that were dumped or banished alongside the 3rd still in deck to access Varudross before utilizing whatever you searched with Warzone. At that
Okay, that was a freaking sentence, dude. Holy.
stage, it almost operates like a searcher that insulates other strategies from harm before the normal, meaning that any deck that uses the tri-type can actually benefit from an engine of these cards quite effectively. Immediately, strategies that come to mind for this are Dinosaurs, who are always looking for more cards to add to the pile, Sword Soul, who now have access to an Omni Negate again after the loss of Barone, or simply using the 3 materials to summon out an easy Protoss, which is still a pain in the ass to this day. As for Dinosaurs specifically though, Warzone pulls double duty by searching either a Dinosaur for your combos or for Lithosasm, who's a worm that fits under the lock, and thanks to doing standard Dinosaur shenanigans with popping the babies, you can already trigger the Mistva on your own turn, which in turn can convert more babies into interactions through the continuous spell lines. All in all, this is potentially a powerful build-around engine for other decks, but as for what it can do solo, the options are still pretty limited for now. YCS Anaheim would be held the same weekend, and instantly Ryzeal and Malice would have an impact, completely usurping the previous meta and marking themselves as the new decks to beat. Triff would take the event on Ryzeal, fulfilling a called shot at the start of the year to win a YCS by year's end, showcasing how versatile the new cards actually were. Because the Ryzeals don't lock you until you use their summon from hand effects, starting with Ice for X to search Sword allows you to make Exciton Knight before the lock, which is a light fiend for accessing Requiem and by extension the entire Fiendsmith engine before proceeding with Ryzeal plays. Thanks to this, Ryzeal has the ability to self-insulate its own combo by making a Caesar before committing.
I mean, this was a very, very good call at the time. The invention of Ryzeal Fiendsmith was pretty impressive.
The sword summon, which leaves the option open to get absolutely crazy with your combos beyond that. Malice would also have a strong showing for its debut, being only a core of about 16 cards, meaning that the remaining deck could be filled with hand traps and generic tools for enhancing the deck's game plan, like the Kashtira pieces. I'd also be
I don't
remiss
know
if
who
I
did it. I'm not saying it was Triff. Whoever did it was a good job. I'm not saying it was Triff necessarily. I don't know.
Mentioning Dimension Shifter, being by far and away the best hand
but
trap.
I will say, even just recognizing it is that good was a good call, because I heard of Ryzeal Fiendsmith before Anaheim, and I did not go with it, you know, because I didn't test particularly much for it, but I did not see the potential in it right off the bat.
The deck, and arguably the format, as the entire strategy would almost prefer to play under a constant macro effect thanks to their resummon effects. To help solidify the passing of the torch in a sense for the meta, the ban list would be updated on day 2 of the event, December 8th, being announced live at YCS Anaheim directly following the finals. Newly banned were Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, Jowgen the Spiritualist, and Original Sinful Spoils Snake Eye. Newly limited were Phantom of Yubel, Tenpai Dragon Chundra, Sangen Kaiman, and Zodiac Barrage returning from the banned section. Newly semi-limited were Cyberjar, Danger Jackalope, Danger Tsuchinoko, Ava, and Performapal Monkey Board, all returning from limited. Lastly, unlimited were Blaster, Pinkertops, Ebe, Tiger, Redox, Airlifter, Tempest, Colossus, Tidal, and Spirit Gates. This ban list was...
It was alright, in hindsight. I think it's alright. I still to this day, I personally think Flamberge over OSS was slightly better, but this balance was alright.
Was odd. Obviously, the biggest change here was the banning of original Sinful Spoils, which many players had been wanting for half a year at this stage, but honestly seems a little off base at this point in time. While yes, Snake Eyes and other decks utilizing OSS had been coming back up in the meta since the release of Rise of the Abyss, it seems like the deck had actually been put a bit on the back burner with the release of Crossover, feeling a little bit like kicking them while they're down. The banning—
Nah, but that's major cap. Like, only thinking that Snake Eyes, Yubel, and Tenpai didn't deserve further hits only because Ryziel and Malice just came out is not. I don't agree with that. I still think those decks deserve to be hit. Like, dude, we just watched 2024 recap. We are at the end of the year and we've seen what those decks are capable of. Nah, keep kicking him. No, keep kicking.
of Jowgen and Nightmare, on the other hand, are directly aimed at Branded. At this stage, anytime Branded was topping, it was on the back of a special summon blocker like these two. Yubel and Tenpai would also catch hits here, with Phantom going to 1 hampering Yubel's repeatability heavily, and Tenpai going from 6 copies of their best starter down to 2. As for the lifts, nothing too major came off the list, with the most notable change here being the Dragon Rulers, one of the most divisive archetypes in history, now being completely unrestricted again, but even then, they do nothing to the current meta. And with that, 2024 in Yu-Gi-Oh! Would come to a close. Overall, this has been one of the most difficult years for me personally to keep up with the game, namely because of a combination of the price point, but also in that there were so few releases, many points of the year would just grow stale overall. Thankfully, it seems like we're going to be getting more regular releases as we move into 2025, with one of the first releases of the year being a new structure deck, so hopefully we can see more movement in the meta outside of 2 to 3 large bursts a year next time. I would also just like to take a minute here post-recording and give a huge shout out to my Patreons, Arrow Noir, Brushwag Collector, Dammit Marco, Franz Burkhauser, Jukes, Misaden, NTB Yugioh, Otaku GamerX, Prinrin, The Critic of Innocence, and Zero Regent, as well as all of my other patrons over on patreon.com. You all have helped this be an absolutely incredible year for the channel, and I cannot thank you enough. If you'd like to support the channel and see my videos,
my mouse was empty, so I had to fix it real quick.
a day early.
Anyways, we are at the end of 2024. Yeah, I don't know. Me personally, I didn't vibe with a lot of the decks that that came out in 2024, so that was my personal issues. It's not about like release schedule and all that kind of stuff. I do think towards the end of the year they've done some good stuff. Also, I do want to say that a decent amount of ban list changes were pretty good in the long run. Like stuff like banning Baron, even though it didn't solve Snake Eye in the short term, was still a very good decision in the long run. You know, like Baron, Savage, a lot of Floodgate hits happened in the year. We saw it, Rivalry, Gozen, Tikaboo, Skill Drain, all those things, changes that happened in 2024. Appaloosa eventually, like there's a lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff that happened in 2024. It's just I didn't vibe with some of the archetypes. So I think overall in the long term, you know, I mean Snake Eyes is gone now, but the Appaloosa ban is still persists, you know, like we still have no Appaloosa, and that's good. So I think in the long term 2024 is fine. We're bouncing back at the moment. I do think TCG is more fun right now than it's been in basically all of 2024, so that's good. Master Duel will soon experience that change, hopefully. We are hopefully nearing the end of Snake Eye, Tenpai, Yubel stuff in Master Duel. But anyways, once again, the link to the video is pinned. So if you enjoyed it, make sure to leave some love for the Law Yugioh for always creating these long recaps for us to enjoy. It's always a grand old time, and we're gonna also watch the next one eventually. So yeah.